the Western fantasy journey that began with Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 151 Assassination. As an iron race with lofty ambitions, Harrog thought that his mission should not be to wait in the stable with Paul, who he thought was always stupid, but to enter the inn full of prey and start a real battle. Although it was safe to squat here, and although Chief Iron claimed that his mission was important, Harrog still had a skeptical and resistant attitude towards it. The exit of the inn was blocked. Who else could run here to ride a horse and escape? So the mission of him and that stupid Paul was just to guard the horses? What was the importance of this? Obviously they were excluded. When others ran in and paid iron money unscrupulously, Harrog could only squat at the door of the stable, smelling the unpleasant smell of horse manure in his nose and listening to the restless neighing of horses in his ears. If all these horses belong to us, we will be rich. Paul beside him said hopefully, which made Harrog secretly endure this stupid and foolish remarks in his mind. Perhaps you should ask our leader Aaron whether it is legal to pay iron money for a few horses. He snorted in response. Forget it, the leader will hit me on the head if you say that. The other party replied in a silly voice. You have self-knowledge. Harrog curled his lips secretly when he heard this. Their group of people went ashore secretly in order to get information, but it was obviously impossible to have any information in the remote fishing village, and there was no information in the hidden forest. So after thoroughly exploring the surrounding area, Lord Aaron, who led them, decided to target this inn near the edge of the forest. There was a lot of traffic in the inn, so the news was relatively more informed. Under normal circumstances, this would not be a bad idea, but the alcoholic leader Aaron Greyjoy seemed unwilling to accept that his brothers were commanding the fleet to fight the enemy, but he was just sent as an unimportant spy. So perhaps to vent his mentality, or perhaps to pay some iron money, leader Aaron decided to use a tough attitude to get information, rather than being secretive. In his heart, Harrog was very dissatisfied with this. Although this method was fun, it obviously had consequences. If anyone inside escaped and leaked their existence, they would not be able to have a good ending. He would not forget that this was the territory of the lion, and it was an angry old lion. Thinking secretly, Harrog suddenly heard some movement behind him, turned his head and frowned. What did he see? A little boy? How did a child get out? The doubts in his heart did not make Harrog hesitate at all. The order issued by the leader of Iron was not to let anyone go, so he turned his head and looked at his companions beside him. Go and deal with him, Paul. I hate to attack children. Complaining like this, the strong iron man named Paul did not hesitate at all, but stood up with a long axe and strode towards the child. Seeing this, the boy with messy black hair looked very panicked. He took 2 steps back and turned around and ran out of the back door of the stable. However, Harrog sneered secretly. There is a closed yard behind. Where can you run to? Poor little guy. Watching Paul's back disappearing, Harrog thought secretly. These children in the Greenland are very different from the children in the Iron Islands. They lack courage. When they encounter danger, they will only cry loudly or flee in panic. Little do they know that in the face of real danger, running away will not solve the problem at all. The only correct choice is to face it head on. Harrog was bored and remembered a sentence his father told him before he left. This way, at least you can die bravely. He thought this sentence was correct, but this sentence was actually his father's advice to him on how to deal with danger. He was very worried, because there was no seawater on land. If he died here in battle, could he return to the drowned god's flowing palace to have fun with the mermaids? Whenever he thought of this problem, Harrog's mood would unconsciously become very bad, and because of the child who just appeared, he thought of this matter that was very important to him, or to the Iron People. Iron People are born in the sea, and they must die in the sea. Obviously, Harrog didn't think there would be any unexpected situation, but he squatted at the door of the stable and waited for a while. But what he waited for was only a faint scolding and a sudden scream, which made him stunned and frowned. You can't even deal with a child? What a waste. Thinking so, he simply stood up, pulled out the short axe on his waist, and stepped towards the back door of the stable. The scream sounded very familiar to him, but he thought it might be a child biting his arm or something, and he didn't think that his stupid but strong as a bull companion would be in any danger. However, just as he opened the curtain of the back door and stepped out, he suddenly found that his stupid companion was actually collapsed not far from the yard, holding his bleeding thigh and neck, with his mouth wide open, but trembling silently, and pointing at him. This situation made Harrog's heart tighten, but before he could react, his neck suddenly sank, as if something heavy had fallen on his shoulder. Following closely was the rough feeling of a sharp object piercing his eyes, accompanied by a fierce pain, which made Harrog scream. He subconsciously swung the weapon in his hand towards his head, but it seemed to be swept away, and the sharp object in his eyes was instantly pulled out. This pulling out brought a more intense pain, but Harrog did not have time to experience this pain, and suddenly felt a cold metal weapon piercing his neck fiercely. His throat was blocked, and even breathing became very difficult. The young Ironborn was forced to stop screaming, and the strength in his hand holding the weapon also disappeared in an instant. His only remaining eye tried to stare upwards, but he could not see the attacker's face at all. He could only see a leg hanging down beside his chest. Judging from the size of the leg, it was obviously not an adult. At least he died heroically. This thought flashed through his mind again in a daze, and then his mind was swallowed by endless bitterness. How heroic is it to die at the hands of a child? The important thing is that there is no sea here. The body of the young Ironborn fell to the ground involuntarily with a thud, bringing up a cloud of dust, and the black-haired boy hanging on his neck also rolled on the ground in the direction of the fall to relieve the force, and finally stood up nimbly. The surrounding environment became quiet. After standing there for a while and panting, the boy squatted down, and wiped the bloodstains on the dagger in his hand with the clothes on the corpse. Finally, he turned his fingers, and put the dagger into his sleeves. Then he looked at the body of another Ironborn man lying in a pool of blood not far away, staring blankly at the sky and dying quietly. He turned his head, and listened quietly to the noise outside for a while. Feeling that there was nothing unexpected, he stepped forward, and ran towards the front of the stable. The series of battles seemed to last less than a minute, and the shouting and killing sounds from the direction of the hotel were still hazy and intense. Obviously, the Ironborn had not yet dealt with everyone inside. The boy thought that he had plenty of time, and he was also thinking about whether he should just leave. However, just as he walked to the front of the stable, everything he saw made him change color instantly. In the woods not far away, another group of Ironborn appeared at this moment, and the direction they were heading was where the stable was. Thank you to book friend Sankian Mengi for the 2000 reward. Thank you to book friend Zyanatang 246 and book friend Miliki Angwudi for the 1000 reward. Thank you to book friend Zusa who works hard to become a top student for the 400 reward. Thank you to book friend Yudi Shenge. Book friend Chenchayandeo, book friend Ijunjanai and book friend 201812312317227881 for the 100 reward. I will come up with a plan for more chapters later, and all the previous rewards will be made up. Chapter 152 Heir to High Garden. The attack on the hotel at the mouth of the forest ended with the Ironman's complete victory. Facing these brutal and numerous enemies, the travelers in the hotel were no match at all. The whole battle seemed to last less than 10 minutes, and the noisy shouts and screams basically disappeared. At this time, the sun in the sky was strong, but it could not dispel the coldness after the winter. Not far away, in a forest of dead branches, more than a dozen bodies that were shaking and dying after being interrogated were hung by the Ironman. The blood gathered at the toes and ripped on the surface, blending into the soft soil and turning into pieces of dark red. The faces that died with eyes wide open were dull and painful, silently accusing this cruel world. However, not everyone died on the spot. Although the Ironman's purpose was to find out the news and then kill them all after the battle was over, and the Ironman achieved their basic goal, there were still 2 survivors who were sent to the black-haired Ironman leader who was sitting on a chair in the hotel. 2 people, one big and one small. The older one was a man with scars all over his body, but still full of anger, while the younger one was a sloppy child who looked honest. This woman killed 6 or 7 of our best men, Chief Iron. I think she is not a simple person. An old ironman with grey hair kicked the silver-haired man who was tied up. The other party responded with a threatening look and was slapped again. No matter how simple she is just a woman. The black-haired ironman called Chief Iron had a very obvious hooked nose, and his black eyes glanced at the captives kneeling on the ground with interest. But she is pretty. She killed many of us. A bald iron man next to him grinned. Hand her over to me, Aaron. I will interrogate her well. This is my prisoner. Upon hearing this, the old iron man looked at the bald man unhappily, which made the other party spit. I'm doing this for your own good, Harlot. You are too old. You can't tame a woman like this. I believe Harlot has already offered her to me. The leader Aaron glanced at the bald man. So it's better for me to do the interrogation myself. After saying this, he ignored the expression of this subordinate who had always been disobedient to him, and instead glanced at the sloppy boy next to the female prisoner. What's going on? When we went to the stable to check the horses, we found him trying to climb over the wall and run away. A middle-aged ironborn replied, there are 2 brothers in the backyard, whose throats were cut, but we didn't find the murderer. So you suspect this kid did it? The bald ironborn who was unwilling to accept the situation said sarcastically, this is really rare. 2 good fighters were killed by a kid whose hair hasn't even grown yet. If you don't know, you would think that all of us ironborn are a bunch of losers? Shut up, Mud. It's because we didn't find the murderer that I brought this kid here. The middle-aged ironborn glared at the bald man, then lowered his head to look at the black-haired boy. And I suspect he's not a simple person. Look at his hands and neck. Ordinary farm kids wouldn't be as tender as him. This made the leading black-haired ironborn look away from the female prisoner's chest and look at the boy. More than 20 ironborn who were sitting at the table or standing also looked at the sloppy boy with his head down. The boy seemed to be startled by this, so he spoke in a very weak voice. I don't know how those 2 died. They were already dead when I ran there. It has nothing to do with me. This did not arouse the suspicion of the Ironman. After all, the boy looked only 6 or 7 years old, and at this age, even in the Iron Islands, where the people are tough, he is still a mud player. It is impossible to kill 2 Ironman fighters so cleanly. So, who are you, kid? The Ironman leader named Darren asked with interest. Where are you from? Why are you here? Tell us the truth. Maybe we will let you go after we know. The boy opened his mouth when he heard this, but before he could speak, someone answered the question for him. He is the person your King Balon wants. The tall female captive kneeling on the side suddenly said, someone hired me to kidnap him and then send him to the Iron Islands to hand him over to your King Balon. These words stunned the Ironman who had originally not cared much. After looking at each other, they all looked at the black-haired Aaron who was in the lead. The other party frowned and looked at the boy, then looked at the female captive. My brother never mentioned this. He hired you to kidnap a child? He narrowed his eyes as he spoke, and the person he hired was a woman who started fighting as soon as she saw us. Tell me, if you were really hired by us, why didn't you say it? Your people didn't give me a chance to say it. The woman retorted, if I don't resist, do I wait to be slaughtered? Is that so? The other party nodded suddenly. Maybe after the interrogation, I will cut off your tongue first, and then send you to my brother to ask for details. Maybe he will be happy to interrogate you for real. These words made the silver-haired woman's face turn red instantly, but she didn't say much about it. Instead, she gritted her teeth and said, it was not Baron himself who hired me, but someone else. Then who is this other person? The other party asked with a raised eyebrow. I don't know who he is, but he must be your friend from the Iron Islands. Friends from the Iron Islands won't hire a woman to do something like this. Sometimes a woman's identity is much more convenient than a man's. The leading Ironborn wanted to say something else, but the bald Ironborn on the side interrupted impatiently. Stop hesitating. Since you said that our King Balon wants this kid, then who is he? Randall Tully's eldest son, heir to the Tully family in the Riverlands. The woman said without hesitation, his father is currently fighting with you. I think you should understand how important this prisoner is. After these words fell, the boy with his head down looked a little strange, and the surrounding Ironborn were stunned and confused. Only Aaron, who was in the lead, narrowed his eyes. As far as I know, Randall Tully only has one son who is over 1 year old. When did he have such a big eldest son? These words made the captured woman stunned. The surrounding Ironman also looked at her with malicious eyes. The old Ironman who was holding the woman kicked the captive to the ground and spat angrily. "You lying bitch, you are still not honest. Let's see how we deal with you later. I'm telling the truth. Maybe you remembered it wrongly." He did. The person who was kicked didn't care about being angry. After refuting half a sentence in a daze, he suddenly came to his senses and looked at the boy next to him. "Boy, who are you?" The boy hesitated for a moment after hearing this, and then faced the interested gazes of the people around him, and whispered, "My name is Willis Tyrrell, the heir of Highgarden." After the words fell, all the Ironmen were stunned, and then they couldn't help looking at each other. Chapter 153 Unstable Factors. Brother Balin thought that there would not be many lords in this Greenland who would respond to the call of the usurper. Who would have thought that he would have such prestige? Alas. But it doesn't matter. The key to fighting at sea is not the number of people. My brother Victorian set fire to the lion's ship a while ago, and now The first sentence seemed lost, but the second sentence became high-spirited. Under the bright moon and sparse stars, a group of Iron Men sat around the bonfire in the forest. The black-haired young man in the lead seemed to be a little drunk, so much so that his tongue was tied while he spoke. "Now I have captured the heir of Highgarden, and then used him to threaten Mace Tyrrell. Let's see if he dares to go against us." "That's right, Chief Aaron, you have done a great deed." "What do you mean mine? It's us. We have done a great deed. Ha ha ha." Over there, more than 20 Iron Men gathered together to eat and drink the looted food, and here the two captives were tied under 2 oak trees and were blowing in the cold wind. The dim light enveloped the silver-haired woman not far away from him, who was constantly struggling to break free from the ropes on her body. However, she was already weak from the previous injuries, and the Ironman's binding skills were also very superb, so she struggled for a long time, but to no avail. "Sly boy, if I get the chance, I will kick you to death." She finally glared at the boy under another tree not far away. "Forget it, you'd better pray that no drunk Ironman come looking for you later." The boy answered absent-mindedly. He was very depressed because he failed to escape from the stables in the hotel. Although his life was not in danger, his situation was not very good. Renly didn't want to talk to the dead demon beside him. "You deceived me so badly, don't even think about letting me forget it. Then how are you going to repay me for helping you out?" the boy asked, and the other party fell silent. Renly had previously claimed that she was indeed a hired kidnapper, and that her route had always been towards the Iron Islands. Therefore, the half-believing and half-doubting Ironborn finally suppressed their plan to deal with Tiana on the spot, and instead prepared to wait until they returned to the Iron Islands to find out the reason before making a decision. Of course, the premise of saying this is that Renly's identity is confirmed. Regarding this, in fact, no one can be completely sure, but no one dares to deny it either. Renly's understanding of Highgarden and the Tyrrell family allowed him to respond without any mistakes under continuous questioning. At the same time, he also knew that the real Willis Tyrrell had never been to sea, and it was naturally impossible for the Ironborn to know his appearance. In addition, Renly also knew the number of troops dispatched by Highgarden this time, which nobles were there, everything when Greenshield Island set sail, the causes and consequences of how it was plundered, and a lot of knowledge that a noble child must have. These would not have any impact on the battle situation, but they were enough to make his identity clearer. So even though they were not 100% sure, the Ironmen did not doubt it too much. After the boy's identity was exposed, these guys were ready to give up their original mission and decided to return to the Iron Islands with this important captive. This was a normal reaction, because if the boy's identity was true, it would have a crucial impact on the entire war. There were not many naval forces in the Seven Kingdoms, and there were only a few of them. The largest of them was the fleet of the Redwine family on the Arbor Island in the River Reach, which was also the main enemy of the Ironmen in this war. In the past, the Lannister family's fleet was also large, but the Ironmen's raid basically abolished this fleet. In addition, there were only some scattered warships that were pieced together, and the new royal fleet that Stannis Baratheon had once formed to deal with the Targaryen fleet, but that fleet was formed not long ago and was not large in scale. This was also an important reason for the Iron Islands to launch a rebellion. Otherwise, if the naval power of the Westeros continent was really strong, how could they rashly launch a war between the islands and the continent just by speculating that the new king's appeal was not strong? That is simply a suicidal act. So, if the heir of Highgarden can be used to contain the fleet of the Redwyne family, then the balance of victory in this war will inevitably tilt towards the Iron Islands. Of course, this is the most ideal situation. There will definitely be many unsatisfactory aspects in the actual operation, but even so, it is enough to make this group of Iron people excited. Do you have any ideas, boy? A group of people over there cheered and celebrated, and the woman here asked again in a low voice. I'm still a child. Renly sighed. What ideas can I have? You are not a simple child. The other party snorted coldly when she heard it. Children as cunning as you are rare. If I wasn't a little cunning, you would have been killed by them long ago. Renly opened his mouth to remind, and the other party fell silent again. The boy didn't pay much attention to it, because the discussion of the group not far away attracted his attention. Brothers' cooperation with that group of people will not last long. The leading Iron Man named Aaron was a little unrestrained after drinking too much, and his words became more and more unscrupulous. They said that the Greyjoys killed their son of the drowned god, so they want to kill us all. Haha, son of the drowned god. I really hope that was me. The guy who killed the son of the drowned god has been dead for more than 200 years. An Ironman reminded the other party. Aren't they claiming that they were sent to us by the drowned god more than 200 years ago? The old Ironman who captured Meager continued. I think those people are not simple. Just fooling people. The leader Aaron Greyjoy sneered. If those guys don't say that, how can they get the support of those idiots? Pretending to be a god. Let me say that the son of the drowned god they are talking about is probably a liar. Of course he is a liar. The son of a god will be beheaded by people like us. Those people have loud voices, and Renly, who has sharp ears, had a lot of useful information for him. For example, he is now very sure of the origins of those aliens in the islands. And for example, the situation inside the Iron Islands does not seem to be so stable. For example, this black-haired Aaron who claimed to be from the Greyjoy family seemed to be a complete idiot, and this could obviously be used. After thinking about it, Renly did not think deeply about this situation. He had decided to find an opportunity to jump into the sea and escape as soon as he arrived at the sea. Whether the other party was stupid or not had nothing to do with him. That's right, just escape. Although there was no danger to his life, he noticed that the Iron people were obviously different from the female robbers beside him. That is, they were very fond of drinking, and they were more out of control after drinking. It was not clear at this time, but if this group of people got drunk on the way, who knew if they would do something out of the ordinary? Renly did not dare to hand his fate to a group of unstable people who were unpredictable, so he was ready to escape decisively. As for going to the sea to find the sea ghost, he gave up directly. Although the original goal was this, the understanding along the way had already cleared many doubts in Renly's heart. It would be a pity not to find the sea ghost, but it was just a pity. Besides, he could talk about it when he had the chance in the future. However, Renly was going to give up this initial goal, but the target came to him soon after. Because they were not sure whether the silver-haired woman was a friend or an enemy, the Ironmen did not cause any trouble that night, or rather, none of them who decided to return were really drunk, except the leader. After all, no one would be really at ease in the enemy's territory. The next morning, they set off early, and then they traveled continuously for a period of time. Finally, the Ironmen brought the captives to a cliff by the sea, moved out several small boats, and began to paddle towards the depths of the sea. However, on the afternoon of the day they set sail, a wet and rotten corpse suddenly emerged from the surface of the ocean. Chapter 154 Jasper at White Owl Village. Under the still bright sunshine, a rotten body covered with sticky green water weed and wriggling maggots slowly floated out from the sea, blocking the path of the Ironman boat. An Ironman rowing at the bow was the first to discover it. At first, he thought it was just a dead body that floated from nowhere, but when he raised the wooden paddle to pull it away, he found that the dead body lying on the sea, like mud, suddenly moved a little, then suddenly opened his eyes, turned his head, and looked at him with his empty black eye sockets without eyeballs. Ah. The sudden fright made the Iron Man rowing pale in an instant, and he used the wooden paddle in his hand as a weapon to smash the rotten cheek. But the other party not only did not suffer any damage, but grinned. Seeing this, the rower turned around and ran without hesitation. However, the boat was not big, and there were many people sitting on it. He didn't even move 2 steps before he was stopped by Aaron Greyjoy, who stood up after hearing the noise. "Mood, what are you crazy about? Dead people, there are," the rower responded tremblingly, but before he could finish his words, another scream suddenly broke out from behind him. A rower on another boat not far away also saw the situation, and his face was full of horror. Their reaction attracted the attention of all the Ironmen on the 3 boats. One by one, they temporarily put down their work and ran to take a look, and then the sound of sucking in cold air sounded one after another. The strong sunlight above their heads could not dispel the sudden chill in their hearts. Although the Ironmen were fierce and bloodthirsty, that was only for their own kind. Facing the rotting corpse that was obviously dead and could not die anymore, but still had a reaction on its face, they all broke out in cold sweats and were so scared that they dared not breathe. "Slow down, row slowly, let's leave quietly, yes, quietly, don't disturb it," the leader, Iron, whispered and swallowed his saliva. The others nodded in agreement and began to row secretly and quickly. The 3 boats slowly sailed away from the sea where the corpse was floating. Everyone paddled fearfully while staring at the motionless corpse, fearing that it would suddenly attack. Fortunately, they did not encounter any unexpected accidents until they could no longer see the corpse behind them. One rower breathed a sigh of relief and said to his companion with a thankful look on his face, "Bless the drowned god." Fortunately he found that his companion's eyes suddenly widened before he finished speaking. He looked at the back of him with a look of fear. At the same time, waves of sour and rotten smells gradually drifted from behind him, which made the rower's heart skip a beat, and then he slowly turned his head to look. He saw a face full of death, and now it was grinning at him. "Go to hell." The roar from the bow was accompanied by a sound like an axe chopping wood. The 2 captives tied to the stern looked intently. The ferocious Iron Man with a big bald head was holding a short axe and constantly chopped and kicked at a strange figure kneeling in front of him, shouting some inaudible words angrily while chopping. His axe was very sharp. After a few chops, the head of the strange figure was chopped off by him, but this did not seem to affect the life of the thing. After the head fell off, the figure stretched out his hands to take it, and then the head in his hands grinned at the bald Iron Man again. This seemed to make the Iron Man collapse directly. After a tremor, the axe fell from his hand unconsciously, and then he screamed and turned back and jumped into the sea with a plop. The other people on the boat looked at all this in a daze, and the Iron Men on the other 2 small boats had the same expression. At this moment, no one dared to move at all, but a smell of urine gradually spread until the headless rotten corpse slowly spoke and said a word. "Excuse me, how do I get to Whitegall Village?" The hole-like mouth on the head in his hand opened and closed, making a sound like a sea monster breathing. "Drowned god, save me." After hearing this, an Iron Man screamed and followed his companions to turn around and jump into the sea. Seeing this, the others on the ship also jumped into the sea without hesitation. For a while, water splashed everywhere, and the sound of splashing continued. In the end, only the leader, Aaron, remained at the stern to guard the 2 important prisoners. Facing the headless corpse stepping over, he trembled with a pale face and responded, "No, I don't know. Go away, we don't know anything." "Don't know?" "Yes, I don't know, we all," Aaron replied tremblingly, but before he finished speaking, a childish voice suddenly sounded behind him. "Excuse me, do you know how?" The interruption of this voice made Aaron's heart skip a beat, but he didn't dare to look back. He just couldn't help but curse the troublemaker in his heart, but what happened next made him unconsciously stunned. The stinking headless corpse in front of him turned his head to look after hearing the boy's words, and a faint blue light seemed to flash in his empty eyes. "Hal, yes." The boy's voice continued to ring, and although it sounded so childish, it made Aaron's pounding heart suddenly calm down a lot. "Hal from your village went out of the village to fight together. Do you know him?" The headless corpse was silent after hearing this, and seemed to recall it, and then the head in his hand said hoarsely, of course I know him. He was sent to the flowing water palace by the great King Rhodes himself. I really envy him for having such a good life. The information contained in the words made the boy understand. It was obvious that the channel on the wrist was only connected to the world where Aya was, and the other party was just Jaspi in that timeline. But at the same time, he also had another doubt. What about you? How did you die? Storm. The god of storms can't do anything to the real Ironborn. The headless corpse laughed, and the mouth of the head in his hands opened and closed, and several maggots splashed out and landed on the chest of Aaron opposite him, squirming constantly. However, Aaron did not dare to act rashly, but stood there stupidly, pretending that he did not exist. The people on the other two boats around also looked at all this stupidly. The boy who was surprisingly brave, and the terrifying existence who could have a normal conversation. Listening to their conversation, the fear in their hearts unconsciously dissipated a lot. Who killed you? The boy continued to ask. Who killed me? It was a madman in a white robe. The headless corpse hesitated and said, but the expression on his face suddenly became very nervous, and even a piece of eroded skin fell off. Oh, that's too scary. I don't want to. I must forget her. That's right. I don't know anything. Nothing. Child. Do you know how to get to White Gull Village? Do you know? You should know, right? At the end of the conversation, it changed the subject, but compared to the initial question, it seemed a little nervous now. On the west coast of Old Wyke Island, south of the Stonebreak Fort. Just keep going. The boy replied, it's not easy to find. No one told you. After asking for so long, maybe it doesn't exist anymore. No longer exists? This made the headless corpse's voice suddenly rise a lot, and even the Ironmen who were listening around were all worried again. But then they saw this terrifying existence side, and his voice became depressed. Yes, more than 200 years have passed in a flash, and White Gull Village no longer exists. For some reason, it seemed to have instantly changed from a terrifying and mysterious ghost to a bored old man, and the head held in his hands was also lifted up and put back on his neck at this time. After twisting it, the thing was magically inserted back. I actually knew it a long time ago. I just hope someone still remembers it. He looked at Renly with his empty eyes, and after a while, he said the last sentence slowly. Child, I smell the anger of the god of storms. You'd better leave, as soon as possible. Yes, as soon as possible. A wave surged here, soaking the entire boat, and then when the wave subsided, the monster had disappeared without a trace. The tide was filled, the words ended, and the tense atmosphere dissipated, but no one spoke. The Ironman had jumped into the sea and ran to the other two ships, looked at each other, and finally all looked at the black-haired boy on the empty boat. Aaron Greyjoy, who was closest, also turned to look at the boy leaning against the stern, with lingering fear and full of suspicion. Boy, how do you know those things? His words were still trembling. I read it in a book. The boy answered. Hal and Jasper of Gull Village are two iron pirates from Old Wyke Island. Their ships sailed to all places in the known world, plundered countless treasures, and finally buried them all on an unnamed island. That's it? Aaron asked in disbelief. Yes, the boy nodded seriously. I originally thought that this story was made up by someone, but I didn't expect it to be true. Where is that island? The bald iron man who swam back because the monster disappeared asked closer. The fear on his face basically subsided, and a hint of greed emerged faintly. I don't know. I feel that he may tell me next time I see him. Renly answered with a blink of his eyes. Does the Gull Village you mentioned exist? Another Iron man who swam back asked hurriedly. It seems to be not far from my home. That's what the book says. I don't know whether it exists or not, and I haven't been to the Iron Islands. You are not afraid at all? The grey-haired old Iron man asked with narrowed eyes. I've heard of it. The boy replied. Many merchant ships have encountered this Jasper, but it never hurts anyone. Have you heard of it? Why didn't you tell me earlier? None of you want to listen to what I say. The matter was finally left unresolved. After draining Renly's knowledge of the story, the Ironborn no longer paid attention to this brave child, and instead began to talk about the dead man just now. Each of them was still frightened and surprised, as if the door to a new world had been opened. Only the silver-haired woman next to him looked at Renly with suspicion, thinking that he was lying. After all, as a person who lived more than 200 years ago, she had never heard of things like Hal and Jasper, pirates and treasure. It was just that the dead man could speak and seemed to be able to control the sea water, which shocked her for a while and even reminded her of her gender issue, so she didn't think much about it and became a little lost. Renly also ignored how the people around him looked at him. Thinking back to everything the sea ghost said, his mind was very confused at this time. The madman in white robes killed her. With such obvious features, it was impossible for him not to think of what it was. However, if it was true, she killed someone, then the so-called right path. Although he had guessed it before, being confirmed at this time still made Renly feel like a big stone was pressing on his heart. The boy's face became a little uncertain because of this. Finally, he looked up at the sky. The cloudless sky did not show the existence of the god of storms at all. But since the monster said so, Renly narrowed his eyes. Originally, there was a dagger hidden in his sleeve, which he planned to use to cut the rope at night, but now he was in a bad mood and had a better idea. Chapter 155 The Storm Calls. Under the gloomy sky, the huge iron fleet sailing on the grey sea was like a group of black monsters moving slowly forward, with the bows breaking through the sea and scattering in all directions, and a large number of white seabirds constantly flapping and chirping around the sails with different patterns. The long ship at the head of the fleet had a sea monster figurehead and several sea monster sails. It was leading the way and looked majestic. On the edge of the deck of this ship, a tall middle-aged man in heavy black armor stood there quietly watching the sea ahead. Next to him was a grey-robed iron man who was as thin as a monkey and was reporting the news in a low voice. Lord Euron has not sent any news. Maybe he still hasn't launched an attack on Seaward. Seaward is not easy to fight. The tall middle-aged man hummed and said, Jason Mallister is an excellent enemy. It will not be easy for Euron to win. The usurper Robert is currently in Lannister Harbor, but we have not found out any other useful information, and Lord Euron has not sent any news. We underestimated the appeal of the usurper. The tall middle-aged man said, but it doesn't matter. What can we do with more people? They have too few ships. King Balance sent a message asking you to pay more attention to the drowned people in the fleet and don't let them cause new trouble. Wait until I defeat Red Wine's fleet. I will pay special attention to them. As he said, his eyes looked at the hazy shadow of the island at the end of his sight again. The bay between Fairy Island and the mainland in front is narrow and not easy to pass through. According to the spies, the navy of the Reach is preparing to pass through there. This is an opportunity that cannot be missed for them on the Iron Island side. So he was ready to defeat the fleet of the River Bay in one fell swoop, and if this battle went well, the independence of the Iron Islands would basically be declared a victory. However, feeling the cold sea breeze around him, the commander of the Iron Islands Navy named Victarion couldn't help but look up at the gloomy sky. After frowning for a while, he turned around and ordered, "Be ready to return at any time. Lord Aaron, this weather is not right." The boat sailing against the wind swayed with the turbulence of the sea. The bald ironman paddled hard and shouted loudly, his arms tense and his face full of tension. "Are we going to encounter a storm?" "Shut up, Mud. There is no storm in this season," the black-haired ironman leader standing behind scolded. However, his heart had sunk to the bottom. As a nation that lives by the sea, the Ironmen are naturally very familiar with the signs of storms, and no matter how you look at it, the current environment seems very bad. However, if they really encountered a storm, these small boats would be overturned. "We should be not far from Victarion's fleet." Aaron couldn't help but say, "Speed up, hurry up, don't hold back." The people around nodded hurriedly. In this situation, the rough faces of the Ironmen were all tense, and no one had the mind to pay attention to the two captives in the corner. Naturally, they couldn't know that the key to the problem was on this ship. The loud shouting of oars continued, and the bumpy boats sailed hard on the sea, slowly moving towards the Hope in the distance. Unfortunately, before they really saw the shadow of the fleet, the surrounding wind quietly intensified, and finally bursts of cold rain came with the wind. At this time, the sea below the ship was like an angry and irritable old horse. After being ridden by the Ironman, it began to shake and struggle violently, and the resulting turbulence made the three small boats in front and behind seem unstable and shaky. This increasingly obvious phenomenon made many Ironmen on the boat shout to cheer each other up, but their voices could hardly penetrate the melody of wind and sea. So when the first boat was suddenly overturned by a huge wave, this encouragement was completely declared over, and all the Ironmen were already filled with despair. It had not been long, but the surrounding environment had changed from calm to violent storms. In the chaotic and noisy climate, even standing up was particularly difficult, and it was even more difficult to open your eyes. Squinting at the embarrassed appearance of the Ironman, the boy tied in the corner of the boat smiled, then turned his head to look at the silver-haired woman who was soaked all over. "Although we are enemies, I still hope you can survive." His voice was not loud, but it was still audible, because the distance was close enough. The other party glared at him when she heard the words, thinking that this guy was saying something sarcastic, but then she opened her eyes wide because she suddenly saw that the boy in front of her had broken free from the ropes on his body and stood up with difficulty in the heavy rain. "Good luck." After throwing a dagger at the other party, the black-haired boy said the last sentence and then tilted his head to look at the leading Ironman who was bent over and hugging the mast at the bow. The guy had already noticed the abnormality at the stern and was now yelling at the boy, but his words were swallowed by the storm. Renly didn't care much about it. Originally, his purpose was to wait for these small boats to meet up with the main force of the Ironman before escaping, so that he might be able to defeat the Ironman fleet in one fell swoop, but the appearance of this storm was beyond his control. "It's only been 2 days since we set sail and we've attracted a storm. Is this small probability calculated in seconds?" Renly pondered this question, but when he saw that the black-haired Ironman leader was already moving towards him, he stopped thinking about it. He ignored everything around him, stepped to the bow and jumped, and the short figure jumped directly into the sea with a plop. The seawater was icy cold, but when the body descended below the sea level, the surrounding environment became much warmer. However, this warmth soon dissipated under the coldness from all directions. Surrounded by the seawater, the boy's thin mouth was tightly closed, and his strange ice blue eyes were quietly opened at this time. Being soaked in the seawater, the feeling was completely different from the initial discomfort, but it seemed that he was not affected too much. After diving for a while, Renly slid his limbs and began to shuttle in the ocean. After a while, he left the vicinity of the small boat. Then he shook his hands and turned to look up. The 3 small boats floating on the sea had now turned into 3 hazy shadows dotted in the dim sky. After watching quietly for a few times, a silver cod came from the bottom of the sea and was swept by the boy's open fingers. Then a touch of blue light suddenly appeared at the fingertips and then spread to Renly's whole body. The boy's body twisted in a trance for a few times and then suddenly disappeared like smoke in the sea. Only a silver cod of the same appearance was left, circling for a while, and finally swung its tail into the dark depths of the ocean. The fish that looked exactly the same also followed closely and left. There were fish of different shapes and sizes coming from all directions, gathering as if they had smelled something tempting. All of this was seen by the leader of the Iron People who was lying on the boat on the sea. He was horrified to see the boy turn into a fish, and to see countless fish flying towards him. In the end, he watched the countless schools of fish gather and blend together, like a vast tornado rising from the deep sea, or like a hideous and terrifying sea snake covered with black vertical scales. It was awakened by the Iron People, wandered in the sea under the boat for a while, and then swung its tail. Caught between 2 types of storms in the sky and the sea, the boat was unsurprisingly completely engulfed by the sea water, along with all the people on board. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 156, The One Who Can't Catch Up. The dark sky became darker as it spread to the north, and eventually turned into a pure ink color. The sea and the sky were one color at the end of the sight, and there was a faint flash of thunder in the terrifying darkness. It seemed as if the sky had fallen. The sea breeze was blowing around, and the drizzling rain kept hitting their faces, causing a tingling sensation. The sailors stood on the deck and looked at everything in the distance, trembling with fear, fearing that the terrifying storm would spread towards this side. Under their feet was a long ship with great sails, and behind this long ship were more fleets with the same emblems. Now this large-scale fleet was docked in the water south of the fairy island in the west, quietly waiting for the storm in the distance to disappear. The three-masted longship at the front of the fleet was called the Queen of the Blue Pavilion. The leader of the fleet, Paxter Adwine, was in the captain's room of this ship at this time. In addition, there was the brown-haired Duke Mace Tyrrell, and many important lords of the Riverage. It seems that the gods, that the Ironmen believe in, did not bless them. Standing in front of the window at the edge of the captain's room, looking at the dark and violent sea, the young Duke of the Reach sighed. Maybe we will come here in vain. This made many lords behind him laugh. Most of them were gloating over this misfortune. Only a bold middle-aged thin man with orange hair frowned as he looked out the window. This storm is not normal. Logically speaking, such a big storm should not appear in this season. Maybe the Ironmen have angered their storm god. A young noble with a red fox embroidered on his chest shrugged and replied. Or the drowned god may have had enough of the idiots in the Iron Islands, so he wants to use us to get rid of them? Be careful with your words, Florent. The thin orange-haired lord glared at the young man after hearing this. Don't talk about gods in the sea. The other party shrugged his shoulders after hearing this, but didn't say anything more. This storm comes at the perfect time. I was afraid that Stannis' ships would be too slow to catch up. Another lord changed the subject and said, in this way, even if the Ironborn do not suffer heavy losses, their journey will be slowed down. I'm afraid that Stannis will also be affected by this storm. Someone next to him shook his head and said, no one knows how wide the storm will be. May the gods bless him. Others spoke up one after another. I'm afraid that the Ironborn will not suffer much in this storm, but will abandon their original plan, so that our ambush will be in vain. If they did not suffer heavy losses, they would not have retreated. I hope so. The lords talked for a few words in front of the window, and then, led by the young duke, turned around and sat back at the conference table. The orange-haired lord waved to a tall and thin servant in the corner. Lion, come and pour the wine. The servant named Lion nodded and walked up quietly to fill the wine glasses of the lords one by one. After finishing this task, he walked to the orange-haired lord and whispered, my lord, the wine in the wine pot is gone. I will go to replenish it. The orange-haired Earl Redwine waved his hand, and the handsome young servant bowed and left. Many river lords behind him were still discussing the war, but the young servant who walked out of the captain's room had a different expression on his face from before. He looked up in the rain and looked at the dark sky. A trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. Then the handsome servant turned and walked towards the entrance of the cabin and finally arrived at a small room under the deck. After looking at the young man who was collapsed and unconscious in the corner and looked exactly like him, he frowned and then suddenly felt something unusual and reached out to grab it. He didn't see anything, but his wrist kept shaking, as if something was struggling wildly in his hand. However, this struggle did not affect the servant's actions. After finding some items in the room, he held the struggling heir in one hand, pushed open the door with the other hand, stepped out of the cabin, and murmured in a hoarse female voice, maybe this is a new clue, little guy. Your master is really hard to find. When the storm came, the huge fleet of the Iron Islands was not in the core area, but it was not completely out of the way. Instead, it was affected by the storm to the left wing of the fleet, and even more than 10 warships and hundreds of people were damaged. Fortunately, this loss was not too serious for the overall strength of the fleet. The fierce storm lasted all night. When the dark clouds in the sky dispersed, and a touch of strong sunshine was revealed, the Ironmen who escaped the disaster began to be busy salvaging the drowned and repairing the boats. However, just as they were busy riding a large number of small boats to rescue people, one of them suddenly found a person who should not be in their sight, so they hurriedly rescued him. I sent him to get information. Why did he come back? Looking down at his brother with a swollen belly lying on the deck, the middle-aged man in black armor who came hurriedly frowned and asked, is there an accident? No one could answer this question. The drowned people on the ship were giving the person artificial respiration through their mouths. On the other side, an iron man whispered, we also rescued a strange woman. Commander, do you want to ask her? The tall figure was about to nod when he heard it, but the unconscious man lying on the deck suddenly opened his eyes, bent over and coughed a few times, and then he vomited a large amount of seawater. So the commander of the Iron Fleet said, "The great drowned god sent you back to us, Aaron. What news do you bring?" His voice was loud, but maybe his ears were filled with seawater, and the question did not get a response, so the fleet leader named Victorian asked again. The other man seemed to have heard what he said this time, so he raised his head, but the expression on his face was completely different from the dissolute and unruly brother that Victorian remembered. His blue lips trembled, and he uttered a terrified word in a trembling voice. "The drowned god has punished us. We, the sons of the drowned god, are the real sons of the drowned god. I saw him, I offended him, we all, please forgive me, drowned god." He began to kneel and sob loudly, causing a trace of displeasure to flash across Victorian's resolute face, and the long-haired drowned man who saved this guy narrowed his eyes. "Don't joke with the son of the drowned god. He has been 240 years ago, it's true." Before the drowned man could finish his words, the black-haired Aaron grabbed the guy's collar angrily, as if he was angered. "He can summon schools of fish and turn into a fish. If he is not the son of the drowned god, then what is he?" This made many of the Ironborn frown. However, the drowned man's face suddenly became uncertain after hearing this. He kept looking at the young man in front of him with his brown eyes. After a while, he couldn't help asking, "Who told you that the son of the drowned god can summon schools of fish? I saw it with my own eyes." Chapter 157. Alienated Octopus. After the storm dissipated, the sky looked as deep and clear as a clean sapphire, and the dim sun was like an edge on the edge of a gem, and the halo made it look more gorgeous. The sea, covered by this bright sky, was extremely quiet at this time, and there was no trace of its violent appearance not long ago. Pure white birds soared over the sea, making crisp calls, and the cold sea breeze blew, causing ripples on the sea surface. A dark school of fish emerged from the deep sea and rushed towards a reef island not far away, but the proximity of the shallows made their number even scarcer. Finally, when a small head covered with black hair suddenly broke through the water and jumped out, there were only a few fish surrounding it. After breaking through the water, the coldness suddenly hit from all directions, and the surrounding environment also changed from extreme silence to a lively hustle and bustle, with wind blowing on the reefs, seagulls crying, tides surging, and a vast sound behind him that sounded like the wailing of ancient sea beasts. Turning his head, he saw a huge black figure swimming under the water. Perhaps sensing Renly's gaze, a column of water suddenly broke through the sea and gushed into the sky, reflecting a brilliant color under the sun. After another ethereal cry, the column of water dissipated, and the huge figure turned over and dived into the sea and disappeared. Renly took a deep breath, then bent down and tightened a rope under his feet and pulled it towards the small reef island behind him. The rope rubbed against the beach, causing a series of dents. It was constantly dragged, and the wooden barrel tied at the end was slowly pulled onto the island. Then Renly struggled to pull the heavy supplies and walked towards a towering rock not far away. These were the supplies on the 3 Ironborn ships before, which Renly brought with him before leaving. Considering that he was currently in the sea, these preparations were very necessary. The sealed wooden barrel contained food and a double-sealed water source. The quantity was not much, but it was enough for a child to use for a long time. In fact, if the estimate was correct, this place would not be too far from the land. Swim back? After leaving the supplies under the big rock and climbing up the warm reef, Renly looked around and could not see any trace of land in all directions. This made Renly think of the huge whale just now. If he had to travel in the sea. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt a chill on the back of his neck. He couldn't help but raise his hand to touch it. A slippery touch immediately entered his palm. Renly frowned, then grabbed the thing and pulled it hard. A small brown black octopus with a big head and many limbs came into his eyes. After the octopus was caught, its big head did not move, but a sticky tentacle wrapped around Renly's wrist and kept rubbing, looking very close. This thing looks very ugly, and it looks quite disgusting at first glance, but Renly is not unfamiliar with it. While wandering in the sea, his left hand accidentally attacked once, and the target was the octopus in front of him. At the same time, the effect after the attack was not replacement, but alienation. The only difference from the previous mouse was that this octopus did not show any special abilities after alienation, except being smart enough. The slippery touch in his hand made Renly's eyelids jump, but at the same time he could feel a feeling of admiration coming from this ugly guy with limbs moving around. This feeling was like smelling a smell in the nose, or touching the temperature with fingers. It was a kind of instinctive perception that made Renly think of the characteristics of his psychic heart that had not been triggered since he got it. It's a pity that it's not very useful, he thought secretly. The emotions conveyed by this octopus were like a child seeing his biological parents, but Renly's current idea was whether to keep this thing and chop it up, to feed the dog for experiments after landing. But after thinking about it, he gave up the idea and threw it into the sea with a swing of his arm. This is not to throw it away, but to let it go back to the sea to survive. In the previous journeys under the ocean, Renly has found that he doesn't need to worry about it. This octopus can always follow him. Even if it accidentally falls behind, it doesn't know why it can still come all the way to find him. It seems to really treat him as its father. Renly hopes that this tracking ability is not its only ability after the alienation, or that the target of tracking is not limited to himself, otherwise it seems to have no other use except for experiments. However, although there is no time to observe carefully, Renly has confirmed one thing, that is, all the monsters created by the mark seem to have no hostility towards him, whether they are those who have been replaced, or those who have been alienated. Maybe I can form a monster army through this? He touched his chin and thought so, but felt that this idea was a bit unreliable, so he stopped worrying, and began to pay attention to what was in front of him. The sun-shrouded reef island was visible at a glance. There was nothing much to see. Renly took off his wet cotton shirt and pants and put them on the stone to dry. He was ready to wait until the coldness in his body dissipated before he set off again. But before that, he also needed to fill his stomach. Thinking of this, he jumped off the stone, then opened the wooden barrel, rummaged inside, took out a hard salted fish, and then sat down on the sand without caring about his image, and started to bite it. Feeling the salty smell gradually spreading in his mouth, the boy narrowed his eyes unconsciously and couldn't help thinking of the news he had heard before. The ancients, transgenders, sea ghosts, white robes, lunatics, Although the war was still going on, Renly felt that compared to the changes in the world, the current war seemed unimportant. Or, this war was obviously also affected by the changes in the world. How many things will be affected in the future? He couldn't help but think of this question. In other words, the current changes were obviously caused by himself, the real-time traveler. Then what about the future? What will he bring to the world? Is it good or bad? His own golden finger. Renly ate his food absent-mindedly, and his mind was full of thoughts. However, after filling his stomach, he did not have the heart to think about these questions anymore. Instead, he prepared to set off. The sea breeze blew around him, and the waves rose and fell. Everything remained unchanged. The ubiquitous cold made people shiver all over, but since he ate a dragon egg last time, Renly's resistance to cold has been greatly enhanced, so although he had goosebumps on his body, he did not feel unbearable. When he jumped into the sea again, he felt a contrasting warmth coming from all directions. The warmth mixed with the endless coldness invaded his body and spread as he wandered. A brown-black octopus came soon after, and then landed on the right shoulder of the black-haired boy and quietly took a ride. Quietly letting himself sink into the sea, Renly held the rope that tied the barrel until schools of fish gradually emerged around him, until a huge silver-white tuna swam over, and then he tied the rope in his hand to the other party, and then swam away in the direction he had identified. The school of fish behind him followed madly, and the big fish tied with a cumbersome object did the same. Renly prepared to swim to the land. He thought it was not difficult to do, because those Ironmen had not actually been out to sea for too long. However, not long after, he suddenly found that he seemed to have turned. Chapter 158 Forced Transfer. Considering the sailing time, the supply problem, the speed and whether the body can bear it, and the surrounding environment. Before jumping into the sea, Renly had thought about many things, but he had never thought about the problem of turning. This made him feel quite confused for a while. The sky was bright and the stars were sparse. In the cold and dim sea, the boy poked his head and turned around. The endless sea stretched to the end of the world in all directions, as if it was endless. Looking up again, the starry sky above his head was bright and deep, but Renly could not tell which one was which among the densely packed stars. What is the shape of the ice dragon? Recalling a compass constellation mentioned by the brown-haired boy Willis when he was chatting in Highgarden, Renly recalled for a while, but in the end he could not remember the specific situation of this constellation. So he had no choice but to give up. Looking back at the supply barrel floating behind him, Renly did not check it, but he could clearly see that the food inside was running out due to his long time of being lost. This made him feel a little depressed, and he also regretted delaying jumping into the sea for the sake of a momentary pleasure. Is it possible to take the risk of taking a boat? He pondered secretly. His body strengthened by blood made him much more resistant to the cold in the ocean than at first, but he still could not stay in the sea for a long time, so he would always surface at a certain time during the day to bask in the sun, and therefore he saw many ships passing by. However, those ships were all iron-born ships, so he did not dare to get close. However, if this continues. Thinking about this problem, Renly recalled a certain experience in the past, and finally he gritted his teeth and plunged into the sea to hide and disappear. After another 2 days, he still did not determine the direction. Whether considering the wind direction, the sun, or even observing the direction of the sailing ships and then guessing, it was ineffective, but instead made himself exhausted. So he made up his mind. So the next day, when a single-masted clipper with a nettle whip flag slowly approached from the distance shrouded in morning mist, a sailor on the ship suddenly found a boy holding a wooden barrel floating on the sea in front of him. Strange, how could a child fall into the water here? An old iron man with a grey beard murmured to himself after glancing at the short figure, but he turned around and walked to the stern to find a rope without hesitation and shouted, "A boy fell into the water, someone, help me get him out." After hearing this, a young black-haired iron man immediately ran over, got closer and took a few glances, and asked in confusion, "How could there be someone here? Maybe he came from the storm a while ago. Is he one of us? We'll know when we get him out." As they talked, they signaled the helmsman to move slightly and lower the rope after getting closer, but the little guy floating in the sea holding a wooden barrel did not look at the rope, but yelled at the sailors on the ship, "Which side are you from?" The young voice seemed to contain a hint of nervousness, but the people on the ship felt familiar and friendly because the other party's words clearly had an Iron Islands accent. "Who cares which side we are from, kid? If you don't want to die, get up quickly." The old sailor with a grey beard cursed with a smile, and some busy sailors around him also laughed. "If you don't tell me, I won't go up." The boy responded loudly, "There is a war here. Who knows if you are the enemy? If you were the enemy, I would have shot you with an arrow long ago, kid." The black-haired young sailor shouted back at him impatiently, "Hurry up, we are in a hurry to get on the road." "Are you really one of us? You are blind. Didn't you see what is painted on the sail? A whip. What else can it be? That is the family emblem of our Lord Tawny, kid, Lord Tawny of Oak Island. Don't say you haven't heard of it. Besides, you can't tell how people on our island speak. I'm from Old White Island, but I don't know what Oak Island is." The boy muttered, but he hurriedly climbed up along the rope. So the rescue sailors went their separate ways, and many people on the ship didn't pay much attention to the drowning kid with an Iron Islands accent. Only the old man with a grey beard asked curiously, "You are so young, who brought you here?" "I'm the squire of Sir Harold. Of course I have to follow my master to the battlefield." The boy leaned against the edge of the boat and looked at the old ironman warily. "Why are you asking this, Harris Harold?" The old ironman frowned. "Do you know him?" the boy asked back. "There are not many knights in our Iron Islands." The other party snorted, as if to express disdain for this, and his tone and attitude became a little worse. "How did you lose him?" "Of course I encountered a storm," the boy replied. "Can you help me find him?" The old ironman patted the boy on the back of his head and said, "We have to go back to Pike Island, but we don't have time to find your master for you. Go and work now. There is no waste on the ship, and when you arrive at Pike Island, you will wait for your master there. If he is not dead, he will always go there. You are dead." The boy glared at the other party, then turned around and ran to an ironman not far away and clasped his hand. The old ironman, who was kicking at the spot because of his words, kicked directly into the air and even accidentally sprained his waist, which made him grimace for a while, but after looking at the clever boy, he still laughed and cursed, and then did his lookout work without caring. Obviously Renly had successfully deceived. There are corresponding accents in all parts of the Seven Kingdoms, and some old hands can tell where a person is from just by the accent. The accent of the Iron Islands came from the Ironman who possessed Renly's first copy. At that time, perhaps it was the body's instinctive memory that made him speak with this accent naturally. Although he has already changed back to his body, he can still remember some of how he spoke in the past when he thinks carefully. At the same time, the sea area he is in seems to be controlled by the Iron Islands fleet. At least during this period of time, he has never seen ships from the Reach or other places in Westeros passing by, otherwise it would not be so troublesome. So adding the two together, he naturally has a certain degree of credibility. The last identity makes this disguise more credible. In fact, Renly didn't know who Horus Herald was, but he heard from the 3 boats before that Victorian, the commander of the Iron Islands fleet, didn't like a guy with this name, so this guy was sent to the land to get information. No one knows what he is like. At the same time, Horus Herald is also one of the few knights in the Iron Islands who believes in the 7 gods. It's strange for a boy of 6 or 7 years old to run to the battlefield, but the system of knight squires has always been like this. At the age of 7, you are qualified to become a squire. This kind of disguise is also risky. Although war mobilization involves thousands of people, if you are unlucky and really meet an acquaintance, you may still be exposed. Fortunately, or not unlucky, Renly didn't meet anyone who knew about this. The only old Iron Man who knew about this person was also quite disdainful of it, and even didn't want to pay attention to him. This is probably a conflict of faith. Renly secretly guessed, but he was happy to see it happen. So in the sea area of Fairy Island in the west, when both sides of the war initially launched a tentative attack, no one thought that a Baratheon royal boy had already boarded an Ironborn ship and headed towards the Iron Islands base camp. It was a bit difficult to find the way back by yourself. After asking around, it seemed that the mainland was already far away without you realizing it, so Renly's plan was to first reach Pike Island in the islands, and then find a way to take a boat to the land there. This process must be very troublesome, but after realizing that he could not find the direction in the sea at all, the distance was far, and the supplies were really limited, Renly could only take this risk and move forward. At the same time, he was also looking forward to the outbreak of the Storm Curse, which might directly determine the outcome of this war. Unfortunately, not to mention the storm, even the weather was cloudy a few times along the way, which disappointed Renly for a while, and he really couldn't figure out how the curse worked. There were no twists and turns on the way to sail. Occasionally, someone would pay attention to him, a servant boy, but not many people would care much about a child, and his identity was not exposed. Renly thought that this disguise would be safe, but unfortunately this thought was completely lost when the ship arrived at Pike Island. The port area of Pike Island was bustling with activity, as if some important person was patrolling there. The returning ship was not big, so it would not attract much attention. However, as the ship was slowly approaching the port, Renly suddenly felt his left wrist getting hot. At the same time, in the unloading area of the port, a middle-aged man with black hair and black eyes frowned, and then suddenly looked over. Chapter 159 cut off my head. Just like he hadn't considered turning to this question, Renly hadn't considered that the mark on his wrist would suddenly show any strange phenomena. In other words, although he had encountered many troubles and problems in the past 6 months since he got this mark, he had never found that this mark would suddenly heat up. This situation surprised him for a while, but at this time, the boy leaning against the board clearly saw that in the crowded port area, there was a middle-aged man with long black and grey hair pointing at this side. The target seemed to be this ship, but a closer look showed that it was clearly himself. So Renly's face changed, and then under the astonished greetings of many Ironmen behind him, he climbed up the wall of the ship without hesitation, and then jumped into the deep sea in front of the port. There was a splash of water, and the grey-haired old Ironman who talked to Renly the most along the way, lay on the boat and looked down. but only saw a hazy figure quickly dived into the deep water area and disappeared. What the hell is this kid doing? He cursed in surprise. Too excited, aren't you? Someone behind him laughed. That kid encountered a storm. It's not easy for him to come back alive. Pike is a very important island in the Iron Islands. The Greyjoy family that rules the Iron Islands has lived in Pike City on the island for generations, so Pike is regarded by many people as a symbol of the Iron Islands, and also the proof of their return home. The voyage was not long, but it also allowed the Ironman to understand that the little guy who was rescued halfway was a very interesting and sensible child, quiet and honest. So although the identity of the squire made the Ironman quite controversial, most people on the ship still had a certain degree of goodwill towards the little guy. However, they didn't have such a teasing mind immediately, because the crew found that a group of soldiers suddenly rushed over to the port, and they were all staring at them. "Are you from the Tawny family?" When the ship was completely docked and the ladder was set up, one of the soldiers ran up and asked seriously. "Yes, we just returned from the battlefield." The old Ironman hurriedly answered after hearing this. "Why did you come back?" "To deliver the wounded. We encountered a storm and fought several battles with the fleet of the River Bay. Many people were injured." "Where is the boy just now?" "Who is he?" "We rescued him from the sea halfway. He is the attendant of Harris Herod." The old Iron Man answered, and then asked carefully, "My lord, what is his problem?" "King Balon wants to see him." The Iron Man soldier answered, "Do you know where he ran to?" "He ran into the water and should come out soon." The old Iron Man replied, "He is a naughty boy. Haha, he is not very honest. Don't blame him, leader." The soldier nodded and returned to the boat to wait quietly with other companions. However, they waited for a while, but they did not see the child's figure coming out from the sea in front of the port, nor did they find his appearance from other places. At first they were able to remain calm, but in the end they looked at each other in surprise. Finally, until someone came to the port to urge them, they still didn't see the child on the sea behind the ship, so the soldier who asked the question had to go back to report. Not long after, all the soldiers in the port received an order. Pay attention to a little boy with black hair and blue eyes, and report immediately if you find him. But don't act without authorization. Why did my father suddenly order the pursuit of a little boy? After the last ray of dusk faded, the port environment of Pike Island was a little deserted. In a stone-cast hall, a middle-aged man with long grey black hair sitting on a chair waved away a subordinate, and the tall and thin boy standing next to him asked, "Is his identity not simple?" "I'm not sure." The middle-aged man with sharp features and thin cheeks had a pair of sharp black eyes like a knife. When he looked at his eldest son, he didn't show any gentle emotions. "But maybe he is very important." "Why do you say that?" The boy was stunned. "As far as I know, that kid is just a squire of a knight from the side branch of my mother's family." "How important is he?" "Squire?" The middle-aged man smiled faintly. "The squire of Harris Hollow is indeed a young child, but as far as I know, the child is a boy with brown hair and black eyes, not black hair." "Is he a spy?" The boy understood after hearing this. However, the middle-aged man shook his head. "Would you use a little boy as a spy?" Then without responding immediately, the middle-aged man sitting in the first seat glanced at the empty stone hall with his sharp eyes, and then suddenly said, "Do you know how I won so many finger dances?" The young man was stunned when he heard this, and then asked hurriedly, "You said before that it was the blessing of the drowned god, so you can win every battle. Is there any secret in it?" "Indeed there is a secret," the middle-aged man said. "The secret is the blessing of the drowned god." The young man opened his mouth in surprise, feeling as if he heard nonsense, but seeing the serious look of his father in front of him, it didn't seem like a joke. His father had sat on the Seaston throne not long ago, and it was impossible for him to call on the entire force of the Iron Islands to launch a war, but this thing happened to be done for him. Outsiders may be very strange about this, but in fact there is nothing complicated about this process. It was won by a bet. Since ancient times, the Iron Islands have been circulating a special game similar to a knight's duel. The rules of this game are that two people throw sharp short-handled axes at each other, and the person being thrown must catch or dodge the axe that is flying back, but must not move a step. This game is called Finger Dance by the Ironman because the game usually ends only after one participant loses at least one finger. Finger dance is very popular among the Ironmen, and it is even a cultural custom. Legend has it that ancient Ironmen even used finger dance to win the position of King of the Iron Islands. No one knows whether it is true, but it is enough to prove the status of finger dance in the hearts of the Ironmen. Every outstanding Iron race is good at finger dance, and all Iron races agree with finger dance, a game similar to duel. Balon Greyjoy used this game to persuade all opponents and finally launch this war. Of course, the specific situation is not simple. A single finger dance will not have this effect, but Balon won 10 games. In one day, Balon Greyjoy bet that he would win the last finger dance in front of all the lords and drowned priests of the Iron Islands. His opponents were veterans of the opponents of the islands. This process should be very difficult. Even if you are proficient in finger dance, you will inevitably be exhausted after participating in 10 consecutive dances with full concentration. After all, fingers are not something that can be discarded casually, and each dance requires full concentration. However, this seemingly impossible challenge was accomplished by the new king of the Iron Islands. Therefore, the lords of the islands who were willing to accept the defeat had no objection to his proposal to start a war, and their support for the new king was also further improved. After that unforgettable finger dance meeting, the boy's admiration for his father increased day by day. He originally thought that his father could be so brave because he did have powerful skills and reactions beyond the understanding of ordinary people, but now it seems that it is not the case. I'm an expert in finger dance, and so are the others. If it weren't for the blessing of the drowned god, I would not have been able to keep my hands for 10 consecutive rounds, let alone win the duel. Seeing his son's puzzled look, King Baron, who was sitting on the chair, said seriously, "You may think that my words are perfunctory, but in fact, they are the truth. I can win because of the blessing of the drowned god." "But father, the drowned god, do you want to say that you have never seen the drowned god perform miracles?" "No one has seen it," the boy whispered. "But I have seen it," Baron said solemnly, "and now, his power is in my body. It is this power that protects me and inspires me. The great drowned god is urging us to restore the ancient road in his flowing water palace, so as long as I work hard for this goal, his blessing will always exist." Such mysterious words made the black-haired boy's mind even more confused. He stood there blankly, not knowing how to respond. In this regard, King Baron did not force it, but patted his son's shoulder and narrowed his eyes. When did he attract the attention of the drowned god? He thought of the captain who violated his orders and went out to sea without authorization before the war broke out. Balon worshipped the ancient ways very much and believed that only the ancient ways were the foundation for the survival of the Iron Islands. Therefore, after sitting on the eastern seat, he set himself the goal of restoring the ancient ways and freeing the Iron Islands from the constraints of the rules of the unified kingdom. But his initial plan was to unify the major forces on the island first, twist them into a rope while accumulating strength, and finally launch a war. However, after beheading the captain who disobeyed his orders, he suddenly changed his mind. He could clearly feel the existence of the drowned god's will, and he could also feel that the drowned god was constantly urging him to open the ancient ways. He could also feel that every time he thought about how to restore the ancient ways, and every time he worked hard for it, a kind of power would grow in his heart, making his condition better and better. So he was able to quickly integrate the divided situation in the Iron Islands. So he was able to successfully reach a cooperation agreement with the drowned people who suddenly appeared on the island, and the war broke out. The drowned god is protecting him, Baron is sure of this, and this makes him more excited and confident than any other encouragement. So this war, what does this have to do with that boy? His son's words interrupted Baron's thoughts. After thinking for a while, he said, "A few days ago, Eren came back and claimed that there was a boy who could call fish and turn into a fish. He said that he was the son of the drowned god." "Uncle Eren's nonsense," the boy said disapprovingly. "Only he and the drowned men believe this, right?" "No." Baron stared at his son's face. "I believe it too." "This," the boy was stunned again. "I didn't believe it at first, but now I do." Baron said some fanatical words in a calm tone. "I felt him. I looked him in the eye. I'm sure that boy is the second gift from the drowned god, or he is the one who brought the drowned god's blessing." "You have to believe, Roderick, the drowned god is watching us, and the ancient road will surely revive." The black-haired boy named Roderick nodded blankly after hearing this, feeling that he could no longer understand his great father, and this feeling reached its peak after the other party's next sentence. "But if the war doesn't go well, Roderick." Baron was silent for a while, then lowered his voice and said, "You have to chop off my head before the enemy. I will make a plan for more chapters later, and all the rewards from friends in the past will be returned." Chapter 160 Ancient Road. A white bat was released by a black-haired blue-eyed boy in the tower of a beautiful castle. It soared in the night and flapped its wings towards the north. As the sun rose and set, it would occasionally land on the ground and use its beak to peck at some grains and grass seeds that remained on the surface of the land. This behavior did not allow it to eat anything, but it seemed to fill its stomach. It would also land in front of lakes and streams to drink water, but this behavior seemed to have no other use, except making its entire body heavy and seriously affecting its flight. It seemed that it had never successfully drunk a drop of water. But this did not affect the bird from continuing to soar in this strange yet familiar world. It seemed that there was a special power in its body that allowed it to continue to have vitality without worrying about dying of thirst or starvation. At the same time, it came from an instinctive memory that it had to find its home and then feed the children it had placed in the nest. That was an instinct engraved in the deepest part of its soul. It had to raise them to adulthood. So it kept flying over the mountains, over the wilderness, over the town, over the farmland, until the vast and beautiful sea suddenly appeared in its sight, and a familiar feeling arose spontaneously. It knew that its home was not far away, which made it more and more excited, and its flapping wings became more and more powerful. But it was not easy to fly over the ocean for a long time, and it would also be very tired, so when it saw some ships on the sea, it slightly changed its direction, and prepared to go there to rest. But just as it approached, an arrow suddenly shot from the ship, instantly nailing its wings to the wood. So it wailed and cried, trying to break free of its wings, and then quickly returned to the home it was about to arrive at, and hide deeply from this dangerous world. Unfortunately, its struggle was ineffective. The arrow that nailed its wings was very strong, and the constant struggle had no other effect, except making it feel pain, and making it weaker. So in the end, it could only watch itself being bitten in the mouth of a human, and then being caught in the hands of a human, and handed to another human. It had seen many people before, but those people were very wary of it. However, at this time, these people did not seem to be afraid of it escaping. This was normal. Its wings were broken, so how could it escape? But even so, it still did not give up struggling. It did not want to be eaten as food by these evil humans, or tortured to death as a toy. It hoped to return to the blue sky, to return to the nest, as soon as possible, and then feed its children. Its struggle was successful. It successfully broke away from the rough palm of the human, but the damage to its wings made it fall to the surface of the ship involuntarily. It was very desperate about this, and something even more desperate happened afterwards. It was grabbed by the human, and then, its head was crushed. The instinct of survival made it full of fear of death, but later it found that it was not really dead, but became a special existence, integrated into the body of the human who crushed it to death. It could sense all the thoughts of this human being, and at the same time, it was quickly infected, changed, and shaped by these thoughts. It began to understand what the ancient road was. It began to understand the burning, killing, and looting of humans, and it began to be completely occupied by them. But everything that had once been washed away became increasingly faint and inconspicuous, and the children that it had always missed were quickly forgotten by it in the corner of its memory. It became the ancient road, or in other words, it became the way of burning, killing, looting, and the law of the jungle. It was influenced by this human being, but this human being seemed to have changed because of it, so the human being began to make up his mind to go to an island to rob some things, so that he could go back and improve the living conditions of his family. The human being succeeded, but he also failed. Because he broke the rules, he was beheaded. Living in this human body, it also faced this threat of death, but at this time it no longer had the fear of death, or in other words, it no longer knew what fear was. At this time, it was just the ancient road, and the ancient road was it. So when it found that it did not dissipate because of the human's death, it directly drilled out of the human's body and rushed towards another human who defeated this human. Gudeo is the law of the jungle. Only the weak will be killed, and the killer is naturally the strong. Gudeo likes the strong. It later discovered that the new human who possessed it was indeed a strong person, and his thinking was perfectly synchronized with it, so it was still very weak and grew rapidly in the human's body. The human's actions nourished it invisibly, and it replenished the human while growing stronger, and this seemed to be a healthy cycle. It felt that if it could continue like this, it would become more and more powerful, fearless, and even it would occupy the whole world. However, a familiar boy appeared later, which wiped out its confidence. It was torn apart. It was divided into two halves. One half still remained in the human's body and survived, while the other half was involuntarily absorbed and controlled by the boy. Its half of will had no resistance in front of the boy, and was completely torn to pieces. Its half disappeared. The remaining half made it feel all of this, and it was full of fear. It was even more desperate to find that, although the separated half had made it unable to feel, it was still restricted by that half. Half of the nutrients provided by humans were thus taken away, and although it was still closely connected with humans, it found that another will had locked itself up. Its thoughts, its past, its existence, everything, were all exposed in front of that will. It desperately wanted to struggle, but it had no idea how to struggle. It didn't know what that will was, but it seemed to be a human, because when that will possessed itself, it faintly heard a communication language that only humans had. What is this? Power seed. It didn't understand this sentence, although it had understood some things about humans. After possessing the human body, it was not a real life, or it had lost its original life. It was no longer a bird, it was the ancient road, the way of burning, killing, and plundering. However, when the ancient road was subdued and became a slave, was it still the ancient road? This thought made it feel unwilling, but then it completely forgot about it. It could no longer sense the existence of that will, and it did not notice that the nutrients provided to it by the possessed human were half of what they used to be. There were gaps in its memory, and its existence was torn apart, but it did not think of itself as incomplete at all. In other words, it was an ancient path, a perfect path, so how could it be incomplete? It was still growing stronger, it was still replenishing itself, and it still believed that it would eventually occupy the entire world, because this world was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. Thank you for the reward of 10,000 from the book friend crying and waiting for the return. Thank you for the reward of 3,000 from the book friend Heath Iced Tea. Thank you for the reward of 2,000 from the book friend The Cat in Scrodinger. Thank you for the reward of 1,000. From the book friend Gu Hezhao, book friend Phantom Zedwing, book friend Huo Kangsheng, book friend Maze Monster, book friend Mr. Say, book friend Aquarius Heartache, book friend Drunk into Madness. Thank you for the reward of 900 from the book friend Efforts to become a top student. Thank you for the reward of 500 from the book friend Linpo. Book friend Eternal Recurrence Equation. Book friend Recalling the Past and Looking Up to Tomorrow. Book friend Hexagon. Book friend Suyazhao. Thank you for the reward of 100 from the book friend Xianatang 246. Book friend ZHZ. Book friend Yedu. Book friend Lezixin. Book friend The Road to Follow the Heart. Book friend Follow the Wind. Book friend Zuachen Ziguang. Thank you to book friends, and for the 100 rewards. Thank you to book friends Bangby, 75-76 years, Ehux, Mr. Hu Yadeo and book friend 160,914,064,312,621 for the 100 rewards. Thank you friends for your recommendation votes and monthly tickets. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 161 Axe Mark. Because the mark is called the Chaos Mark, Renly once named the power generated by the mark as the power of chaos. He originally thought that this kind of power could not be controlled. Just like its name, it was a mysterious and ever-changing existence. But he didn't expect that when that kind of power was integrated into a person's body, it would actually evolve into that kind of strange seed. And then this seed can be recalled by the mark. Sitting in a corner of an unmanned cabin, Renly looked down at his left wrist. The edge of the black and white double arc reverse cross pattern that originally existed there now had a small axe symbol surrounded by a circle, along with the previous heat. The symbol was grey in color and quietly appeared at the edge of the wrist. As the boy watched, grey mist seemed to rise faintly outward. Is the birth of this thing an exception? Renly couldn't be sure. Before, he just touched the sign that appeared quietly with his hand, and then he suddenly felt some memory images and a strange and pure thought. It seemed to be the gloved bird he had released in High Garden, and it seemed to be a little instinctive spirituality in the seed of power. The spirituality was quite resistant to him. However, this resistance suddenly disappeared later. Renly felt that the spirituality had adapted to his existence, or seemed to ignore him. Therefore, when he touched it again, he did not feel any feedback from the spirituality, but heard a sentence. But if the war doesn't go well, Roderick, you have to chop off my head before the enemy. A hazy sentence emerged in his heart, causing the boy who was sitting on the linen bag in the corner to squint unconsciously. In the unmanned cabin, grey linen bags were stacked up around him, and the smell of wheat and bacon filled his nostrils. His sensitive hearing allowed him to faintly hear the noises in the port outside the cabin, telling where he was at the moment. He was still in the port area of Pike Island. The changes in his left wrist and the sudden gaze made him flee quickly, and although the Ironmen began to search soon after, they did not find that the boy had already hidden in the bottom of a merchant ship anchored in the corner of the port. So although the search team passed by continuously, they did not find anything unusual. Finally, when night fell, Renly climbed onto the unmanned ship and hid in what seemed to be a merchant ship warehouse. Then, he discovered this series of changes. Who is Roderick? What is the situation? Renly had some guesses, but he did not have time to pay attention to this for the time being, because he found that after his finger touched the axe mark, the changes that arose were not just feeling something, but also another feeling, that is, stickiness. The grey mist rising from the surface of the axe mark brought about stickiness. This feeling was like the visible smoke turned into substance, sticking to his fingertips when he touched it. So Renly tried to lift his finger, and he saw the smoke rising with it, and finally being pulled away from the axe mark. The mark on his wrist was no longer surrounded by smoke, but Renly's right index finger was wrapped in a layer of light grey mist like a flame. Ancient road. Renly looked at this thing quietly burning on his finger, thinking. His fingers were wrapped in flames, but there was no special feeling, but he faintly felt that the flames were emitting waves of seemingly evil breath. Is it killing? Is it desire? Is it violence? Or plunder? After observing for a while, Renly tried to rub this thing on the linen bag behind him, and the grey flame attached to the surface of the bag and burned. It looked like it was burning, but it actually had no effect on the bag. It just stuck there quietly, floating and rippling, without any sound, and it looked so weird. It can't work on dead things. So after confirming this, the boy raised his finger to scrape the thing back, and then glanced around, staring at a sneaky mouse hiding in the corner of the bag not far away in the cabin. At this time, the sky outside was dim, and a ray of moonlight shone through the narrow window of the cabin, and the mouse was just at the edge of the light, twitching its nose. It didn't look very scary, but Renly stood up and tried to get closer, but still scared it away, but it didn't leave his sight. Renly then took out a hard piece of dried fish from a wooden barrel not far away, stuck the flame in his hand on it, and threw it towards the wooden floor, covered by the light. A piece of dried meat wrapped in grey flames was burning quietly under the cold light. The boy hid in the corner and watched silently. Soon, he saw the mouse sneaking over, and then biting the dried meat with his mouth, seemingly without caring about the flame. The flame suddenly rushed into the mouse's mouth, but the mouse continued to hold the dried meat with its two small forelimbs and chew it carefully. However, before it finished eating the hard dried meat, its movement suddenly stopped, and then it raised its pointed head and let out a squeak. After that, the mouse, which was as big as an adult's palm, began to run around the warehouse frantically, and used its claws and mouth to constantly tear and scratch the linen bags in the warehouse, looking very arrogant. Watching all this quietly, Renly hugged his chest and touched his chin. His eyes narrowed slightly. Obviously, this grey flame can affect the target's thinking, but the mouse's behavior seems to be different from Gudeo. Different cognition? Or is it because of race? Does the flame still have that kind of counterattack ability? Is it the same effect as the original bird? Thinking about this, Renly remembered something he felt when he touched the fist mark before, so he stretched out his fingers to touch the mark on his left wrist again. "Haven't you found the boy yet?" A questioning word quietly emerged from the bottom of his heart. It was not a sound, so there was no emotion contained in it, but at the same time as this word emerged, Renly seemed to see a thin and angular face. That was the black-haired middle-aged man he looked at the port. What a bunch of trash. The second word emerged later, but it was obviously not in response to the first sentence. Maybe he doesn't want to see us yet? Obviously, the connection between the wrist mark and the will of the ancient road can give Renly the ability to read the thoughts of its host, but compared to the beginning, this kind of reading is now not one, but two. Squeak. The moisture from the sea may not be very friendly to my teeth. The Harlow family really has ideas. Squeak. War. Squeak. Touching his left wrist with his fingers and looking at the grey-haired mouse in the warehouse that was running around but not making much noise, Renly can now be sure that the flame that was fed to the mouse before was indeed the ancient road, because except for the lack of the initial memory flashback, everything he felt from the other party was exactly the same as the first bird. So, looking down at the small mark attached to the corner of the big mark on his wrist, Renly fell into deep thought. He could vaguely perceive that a stream of invisible and weak power was being transmitted along the unique connection of this thing, so he guessed that this mark would soon breed that kind of flame again, or the seed of the ancient road. But what can this thing be used for? There is still one chapter left, and it will be posted before the evening. Chapter 162, Supplementary Flames. No matter what the seed of the ancient road can be used for, it seems to be useless for Renly's current situation. In comparison, he now values the mind-reading ability attached to the axe mark. This ability seems to be less effective as the seed spreads more and more, because Renly cannot read multiple targets at the same time, nor can he control who the target is. But for now he is not bothered by this situation. The experiment made the existence of the ancient road become two, but after Renly used the mouse, he directly stepped on it to death. So now he can only read one. Relying on this, he first determined the true identity of the middle-aged man who looked at him in the port area, the contemporary head of the Greyjoy family, the king of the Iron Islands who started the war and rebelled against the Baratheon dynasty, Balon Greyjoy. Then, he can read the other person's heart. This seems to be very beneficial to the entire war, but it is currently used by Renly as a convenient means to hide in the port. The other party values him very much and mistakenly thinks he is the son of the drowned god, so he will basically personally inquire about the relevant searches. So Renly, who knew the other party's detailed plan, no longer had to think hard about how to escape. Not only did he easily evade the search of the Ironborn, but he also successfully used this disguise to board a ship to Great White. Why did King Balon let a child from the Gubera family take our ship? Under the gloomy sky, the first mate of the brig asked, looking at the short figure lying on the bow and tiptoeing at the sea. Didn't the child say that his elders were anxious to call him back to the Lake of Corpses, so King Balon gave him a favor? The middle-aged captain with a beard answered and frowned. The Gubera family of the Lake of Corpses is a branch of the Gubera family of the Cape of Warhammer, and the Gubera family of the Cape of Warhammer is one of the most influential lord families of Great White, and Great White is the largest, most populous, and most powerful island in the Iron Islands. In other words, the Gubera family was very powerful, so powerful that even the newly crowned king of the Iron Islands had to give them face. And this boy claimed to be a member of a branch of that family. This alone was not enough to be believed, but the boy knew where their ship was moored when they set sail, the captain's name, their purpose, and even the coords that King Balon used to contact them. Such a precise understanding could not be false. Most people in the Iron Islands were illiterate, and writing and seals were not popular. Of course, because the child came without anyone escorting him, and also because of some rumors in the port in the past 2 days, they still went to ask King Balon for instructions before leaving, but they didn't find him. It was said that he had returned to Pike City for some temporary matters. Due to the mission, they could not delay for too long, so they could only leave a message and set off immediately. However, they were still paying close attention to the boy secretly, but they did not guard him strictly. Being on the ship, they did not think that a child could run away, so if he was really a member of the Gubbler family, it would be nothing. If the child was the one the King of the Iron Islands wanted to find, then it would not be too late for them to control him. Balon did not announce someone's real identity, so it was obvious that these people did not understand someone's ability. Therefore, they were destined to be disappointed. After several days of good food and drink, the captain of the ship woke up one day and suddenly found that the boy had disappeared. He searched the entire cabin area, but could not find him. Not long after, a message brought by a small speedboat behind them made them regret it even more. King Balon did not order a boy from the Gubbler family to follow them to Great White Island, and the suspicious boy was basically determined to be King Balon's wanted criminal. There are many children with black hair and blue eyes in the islands. The Gubbler family of Great White also has this feature. So although they had suspected it before, they were not sure. However, now that they have learned the exact news, they have lost the boy. This situation makes the bearded captain very angry. Later, Balon Greyjoy, who learned about this, was more certain of the identity of the person because of his mysterious foresight. Cancel the search. He immediately ordered, but notify the whole island, that once the boy is found, provide me with good food and drink. Since he doesn't want to see us, let him go. With such an order, he was not too worried. Balon believed that, since the son of the drowned god had come to the Iron Islands, he would meet him, the king of the Iron Islands, sooner or later. So although he was quite regretful that he could not meet him immediately, he didn't pay too much attention to it because of the tense war situation. But the cancellation of the search did not bring much convenience to Renly. After knowing that the other party was tracking him, he abandoned the ship and jumped into the sea, but he did not really leave. Instead, he followed the ship and took a ride on the wind and finally successfully arrived at the Great White Island in the archipelago. Then he was ready to find a way to leave here, although he knew that he seemed to have accidentally done something to the charlatan. Renly did not have the idea of staying to fool around. He had basically no demands on the Iron Islands, and he did not think that the people here were all fools who believed what he said, so he did not use this identity to influence the current war, which would be equivalent to pulling himself into the vortex of struggle. The purpose of Renly's trip this time was just to understand the truth. Now he has learned enough and even gained an extra benefit. So the most important thing at present is to return to Highgarden quietly and be an adopted son. It's just that during the current war, the connection between the islands is normal, even quite close, but the communication between the islands and the Westeros continent has been basically broken, so he has not heard of any opportunities in the past few days. So Renly decided to stay here first. Information communication between islands is not so convenient, so although he was wanted on Pike Island, almost no one on Great White Island knew of his existence. Relying on this, Renly walked into a fishing village after landing and exchanged a silver coin obtained from the sea for the treatment of staying in a family here for a period of time. In fact, although the Ironmen are cruel, this temperament is mostly for outsiders. For their own people, they are not so bad as to kill anyone they see and have dark and bad intentions. The people of the Iron Islands are very united, and they even take good care of children. After all, the islands are sparsely populated, and children represent the future of this place. Renly lied that his elders were currently out to sea, and he was waiting for his parents to pick him up here. An old ironman who took him in felt that the boy's elders were really brave enough, but he didn't doubt anything else. So after drinking a bowl of hot fish soup, Renly was placed in a narrow compartment of a wooden house in the fishing village. The compartment had a bed made of straw and linen, and a narrow window nailed shut with a curtain. Other than that, everything was very simple. After being properly settled, it was already dark outside. Because the owner was too poor, he had no candles or oil lamps, so the surroundings gradually became difficult to distinguish with the naked eye. The snoring of an old ironman couple came clearly from behind the wooden wall of the compartment, while the boy in a baggy cotton jacket leaned on the straw bed with his knees hugged, squinting at the axe mark on his wrist that was rising with smoke again. After stepping on the experimental mouse to death, the grey flame swallowed by the mouse quietly emerged, but Renly had tried it before, and this flame could not be put back into the axe mark, so he had to put it in a shell and carry it with him in case of emergency. However, at this moment, another flame ignited on his wrist. Renly kept observing along the way and found that the process of the ancient road seed condensing was actually very slow, probably because there was only one host to provide nutrients. And he knew better that at the normal speed, it would take 3 to 5 months for the new seed to completely condense and form. But now, he thought about it, but there were not many clues at present, so he did not think deeply about it. Instead, he habitually listened in the corner and fell asleep on the bed with a yawn. He was also very tired from rushing on the road and lying. For a period of time afterwards, the boy temporarily lived in this fishing village where there seemed to be no young people. On the surface, in order to kill boring time, he followed the old iron man who stayed overnight to learn how to use a short-handled axe and secretly observed and tested the things on his wrist. Then he came to a conclusion. That is, in addition to the normal way of supplementing and forming, the ancient road seed can also be nourished and formed by the power of chaos. In other words, as long as the axe mark is in the empty state, the onset of chaos will no longer cause him any trouble, but will only rush into the mark and breed grey flames. This situation made Renly feel relieved, but another discovery not long after made his relaxed mood disappear. That day he went to the beach to visit his octopus son, but suddenly saw a familiar cat face on the sea. I recounted it, and so far, I owe 20 chapters, excluding this chapter. That's 19 chapters. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 163, The Drowned Man in Pursuit. The kid from the Hunter family wants to learn fishing from me. His legs and feet are no longer able to dig in the mine. In the yard in front of the wooden house in the fishing village, a white-haired old man squatting on the ground said to an old woman next to him, "Maybe he wants to move in. You should clean up the house of Bud's family next door in the next 2 days. No one has lived in it for more than 10 years, so we have to clean it up. That kid is already over 60 years old. Why does he want to learn fishing? I have to learn. If I don't learn, I won't have food to eat. Who made him marry so many concubines and give away all his property and taxes? If you want your sons to live longer, you have to marry more concubines. Without sons to take care of you, who will take care of you when you are old? You didn't marry concubines, but you still have 3 adult sons, right? The 3 sons are useless. They all went to fight. Harrog, Carrie, and Perf. I would be satisfied if one of them came back. At least you had 3 sons. That's because of my seed health." Under the sunny sky, the 2 old ironmen talked about their lives without any scruples. The black-haired boy squatting beside them drank a bowl of fish soup silently and listened to it all. There was no useful information, but it was a relaxing experience for Renly, especially after the continuous running around and long-term thinking about his left hand. He hadn't lived such a quiet life for a long time. Looking back, it seemed that this kind of quietness had disappeared after leaving Storm's End. Thinking about it, he suddenly frowned and then raised his hand to pull his empty left shoulder. There was nothing there, but his hand obviously encountered an obstacle. While pushing, it seemed that a fleshy claw was placed on the back of his hand, and he also felt a furry warmth. "This is the black cat named Baratheon, an invisible but real cat," Renly confirmed. After leaving the Seven Sons copy, he found that the cat had disappeared, or when he saw it reflected in the water, he thought the cat had become a ghost. He wondered at the time whether the black cat was also affected by the mark on his wrist and disappeared, but there were not many clues, so he didn't think much about it. When he lived in Highgarden, he always felt that there was someone beside him when he slept, so he thought of the cat that turned into a ghost again, and even guessed that the cat might have turned into an animal state that was not completely replaced, invisible but existing. However, that kind of animal would not leave a reflection in the water, and it could also be touched, but no matter how he searched, he could not feel the existence of any cat. So this problem became an unsolved mystery, and Renly would take it out and think about it whenever he had time, but he didn't have too many thoughts. Later, when he left Highgarden and stepped onto the battlefield, he had no time to think about such things that seemed unimportant to him. The constant running around even made him forget the existence of the cat. It was not until 2 days ago, when he saw the reflection of the cat again at the beach, and until he was hit by the air, that he was sure that this black cat named Baratheon had indeed become invisible like those replacement animals, but it seemed a little special in comparison. Because of the scale on its chest, Renly guessed. There was a scale mixed with gold and grey between the hair on the black cat's chest. Renly could see it clearly through the reflection, and thought that the scale might be made of the dragon eggshell he had lost. And he did not forget that the dragon eggshell and Rhea were of the same origin. But he did not know the details. The invisible black cat could not only not see, but also could not make a sound. Even Renly hoped that his psychic heart characteristics could take effect here and understand the black cat's heart, but he also had no reaction, not as good as his octopus son. He did not know whether the black cat had no desire to communicate with him, or it was in a special state and could not communicate. For this reason, Renly could not understand how this cat ran to him. You know, he was diving and storming all the way. Even if the cat had followed him out of Highgarden, it couldn't have kept up with him, right? This is another unsolved mystery. Subconsciously chewing a piece of fresh fish meat, his thoughts were in a mess. Renly didn't notice that the surface of the bowl of fish soup in his hand was generating ripples. It was obviously being eaten by a strange pet that he pushed off his shoulder. The two old men squatting beside him were still talking, and they also didn't notice this special situation. I really hope that King Balon can win the battle, so that those young people don't have to suffer like us, mining and fishing all day long, fishing and mining, and being fooled by those merchants from the Greenland. The old man who was drinking the fish soup kept nagging, and his eyes finally looked at the boy beside him. Little Rob, are you leaving today? Renly, whose thoughts were interrupted by the words, came back to his senses, first spit out a fish bone in his mouth, then nodded and said, yes, the appointed time has come. If I don't go, my father won't wait for me. In fact, he finally found an opportunity to leave here, so he was ready to leave, but he would not tell this to the old man. Then go quickly. The grey-haired old man nodded. Don't keep our good king waiting for a long time, otherwise you will suffer. He was not talking about the real king, but a nickname. There is a popular saying among the Ironmen, those who have ships are not slaves, and there is another saying that all captains are kings on their own ships. These sayings indirectly confirm the special nature of navigation and ships in the Iron Islands. Therefore, fishermen and seafaring plunderers in the Iron Islands have a high status, while mining and farming are looked down upon. They are generally the work of the slave class, but when the slaves were liberated by the former King Warren Greyjoy, the Ironmen had to go on the field themselves. During this period of stay, Renly felt a lot of aspects of this special culture, and he also understood why people here had to clamor to restore the ancient roads all day long. It was because life was too hard, the Ironmen were too poor, resources were too scarce, and the geographical location was too bad. All these factors converged into the ancient roads that were unique to this race, not just their nature. So throughout the history of the Iron Islands, although there were many rulers who wanted to abandon the ancient roads, none of them succeeded. After eating the last fish soup here, Renly left a few pearls he had touched while diving a while ago in the hut where he lived, and then said goodbye and left in the quilted linen top and trousers provided by the old couple. The old ironman in the yard behind him seemed reluctant to see the boy leave. He kept looking at his back until he could no longer see him. Then he turned around and said to his wife with emotion, look at the momentum of his walk. He will be a famous Ironman when he grows up. Little Rob is a good boy. The old woman was washing dishes in a wooden basin at this time. She nodded in agreement. It's just that he is running around at such a young age. He is a little too wild. What do you mean wild? The children of our Iron Island can't be like those sheep in the Greenland. They are raised in stone houses and bleat and wait for people to feed them. What kind of future can they have? The old man replied disdainfully, and then he was about to stand up with his crutches, but suddenly he saw a group of people running hurriedly outside the yard. He exclaimed, and then he quickly knocked the old woman's knees with his crutches. Hurry up, Salt Tongue is coming. In fact, the old woman had already noticed it without him calling. So she hurriedly knelt on the ground with her husband and then greeted him a little stiffly. "My lords, how are you?" Usually, when the people greeted them like this, the drowned man priests would open the leather bags of seawater they carried with them, pour water on them and bless them. However, this group of drowned men wearing rough linen robes and holding driftwood sticks did not return the greeting as usual. The old drowned man with a pair of grey eyebrows, who was the leader, patted the kneeling old man on the forehead and asked hurriedly, "Do you have a child living here, little Rob?" The old man replied, "That's right, my lords. You asked this, where is he now?" The drowned man interrupted him. "He has gone." The old man replied, "He went to Sealskin Point and said he was going to take a boat back to Old Wyke Island. The child is from Old Wyke Island." This made the group of more than 10 drowned men look at each other in surprise, and then they whispered to each other for a while, seeming to be quite excited. The old man was puzzled. He vaguely guessed that the identity of the little guy who had lived in his home for more than half a month seemed to be extraordinary, so he couldn't help but ask a question. "My lord, what are you looking for little Rob for? You can't call him by his name, that's..." A young drowned man raised his eyebrows and was about to scold, but the drowned man next to him suddenly grabbed him and shook his head. The old drowned man in the lead replied at this time, "That child is very important to us, old Eddie. Maybe you have done a good deed." As he said, he pulled up the seawater bag he was carrying, blessed the 2 old men with sea salt, and hurriedly left with the group of drowned men, muttering something like, "That woman really didn't lie." This made the 2 old men at the scene very confused. Could it be that little Rob is the son of King Balon? The old woman asked suspiciously. "King Balon has many sons, and I don't see these drowned men being polite." The old man, who came to his senses, hummed and replied, then stood up with a little effort and walked into the house with his crutches. "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The affairs of big shots have nothing to do with us." They also said that it was a merit. "How many days do you have left to live? Is merit useful?" The old man who walked into the house scolded, "If you have time to think about these things, you might as well think about what to eat in the evening. Fish soup, fish soup, fish soup all day long. I'm tired of it. Thank you Heath Iced Tea for the reward of 1000. Thank you Don't Annoying for the reward of 500. Thank you Zyanatang 246 and Lehenshian Ie Tangzi for the reward of 100. Chapter 164 Eat an Orange. Renly had no idea that, if he was a step later, he would be found directly. However, he did not walk far away at this time. Instead, he squatted on a reef outside the fishing village, staring at the brown-black octopus shaking its limbs in the sea below him, thinking. He did not touch it, but he could clearly sense a series of special emotions emanating from the octopus: closeness, pride, frustration. This octopus following behind him was always very close to the boy's existence. Frustration might be the emotion that the other party had been hanging around for a long time without being picked up, but the pride made Renly a little confused. He scanned for a long time and finally barely found a special thing. The body has become bigger? The boy touched his chin unconsciously, then rolled up his trouser legs and jumped down to pull the octopus out of the water. The slippery touch made him feel quite disgusted, but the feeling of holding it in his hands was indeed much heavier than before. "So you are still a child?" Staring at the ugly thing in front of him that smelled of the sea, he muttered so, but in his heart he believed in another possibility. Initially, this octopus was alienated, but after the alienation, apart from being able to intelligently and actively radiate emotions to Renly and following closely behind him, there was nothing special about it. Later, Renly had a sudden idea and fed it an ancient road seed, and then, in fact, nothing special happened. It was just through the axe mark that he could detect that this octopus would occasionally attack fish in the sea when living alone on the seabed, and its personality became a little more irritable, but it was completely different from the arrogant appearance of the mouse before, and it still maintained its rationality. At this point, it is very likely that its enlarged size was due to the feedback of the ancient road seed. After throwing this thing into the sea, Renly pondered for a while, and finally shook his head, stopped thinking about it, and turned to head towards the destination. The Ironborn couple who took him and thought that Renly was going to Sealskin Point, but in fact his destination was a place called Pebbletown east of the fishing village. There were ships preparing to set sail, heading for a place called Seafront City in the Riverlands of Westeros, and now there was another war going on there besides Fairy Island. Pebbletown is located in the southeast corner of Great White Island, close to the coastline. The stone buildings in the town are crowded and messy, except for the fact that they are surrounded by a square castle. There is no planning to speak of. The people living here are basically fishermen, thousands of them. Walking on the muddy roads of the town, you can see old townspeople dressed as fishermen passing by one after another. You can often see fishing nets and dried fish drying on the roadside. The air is full of the stench of sea fish, which is always lingering. After almost an hour's journey, Renly had arrived here. At this time, his appearance was not very eye-catching. His dark hair, which had not been taken care of for several months, had spread to his shoulders. The bangs on his forehead also intentionally or unintentionally covered his unusually beautiful eyes. The clothes he wore were the clothes worn by the son of the old couple who stayed with him when he was a child. They were simple and ugly, and were no different from the clothing characteristics of the fishermen here. "Excuse me, has Lord Merlin's boat left?" After walking on the street for a while, he stopped an old fisherman passing by and asked a question. His not so skilled but basically qualified iron accent could not arouse anyone's suspicion. "We won't leave until tomorrow morning," the old fisherman replied, and then he looked at the child who was alone and asked, "Where are you from, kid?" "From Thumb Village," Renly said the name of the fishing village where he lived before. "My father was called to war by Chief Merlin last time, and I don't know what the situation is now. I want to find someone to give him a message." "A message?" The old fisherman nodded in understanding, and then pointed to the north of the town. "The boat is parked under Lord Merlin's castle. It's easy to find, but no one is allowed to get close there at night. Boy, hurry up if you want to go." "Okay, thank you," Renly responded politely, and then turned and continued to move towards the castle. But halfway through the road, his steps suddenly stopped. Because he saw a special situation on the street, or in other words, a person sitting there waiting to die. It was a man with ulcerated skin on his face, breathing heavily and obviously suffering from a serious illness. He leaned against the wooden wall at the edge of the alley, wearing a washed out linen shirt that looked as thin as summer clothes. Fishermen passed by from time to time, but they avoided the place where the man was, fearing that they would be infected by his disease. Erythema. Renly recognized the disease the man suffered from. The disease manifested itself in the form of extremely itchy red spots on the skin. After the patient became ill, he could not bear the itching, and usually scratched hard, and then the wound became infected and festered. The disease was not serious for children, but it could be fatal for adults. At this time, the man in sight was obviously not going to survive tonight. Thinking of this, Renly took out the half orange given by the old woman who took him in before leaving, and then took out one of the white shells he carried with him, dug out the fire inside, and stuck it on the orange, and finally walked to the man at the edge of the alley, and handed him the orange. "I'll give it to you. Eat an orange before you die." The man obviously didn't expect that a child would dare to approach him. He was stunned for a long time before he reacted. However, he didn't take the orange, but smiled weakly at him. "Everyone said that you are going to die. It's a waste to eat this thing. Boy, you eat it yourself." Normal people can't see Renly's fire. He has confirmed this. Naturally, the man in front of him can't find the abnormality on the surface of the orange. "Then let's each have half." Renly seemed not to hear the patient's words. He broke the half orange into 2 halves and handed one half to the other. "Eat it. If you don't eat it, you will never eat it again." This sentence made the patient, who originally didn't want to eat, hesitate for a moment. Finally, he carefully raised his equally festering hand to try not to touch the boy's hand. Then he put the orange into his mouth and chewed it. The sweet and sour juice dispelled the bitter dryness in his mouth. In a trance, it also slightly lifted his originally sluggish spirit. "Thank you, kid. Maybe because of this orange, I can live one more day." Hearing this, the boy looked at the face that was forcing a smile and nodded. "Good luck to you. I also hope that the drowned god will always protect you." The other party replied, and then looked at the boy's back as he turned and left, pursed his lips, and was quite moved. But after a while, his mood was suddenly interrupted, because another person walked in front of him and blocked the sunlight. "Did the boy talk to you?" The hoarse female voice sounded strangely charming, but the strange look she looked down at was very aggressive, which made the patient feel very uncomfortable, but he still nodded. Yes. What did he say? The other party asked again. Hearing this, the patient frowned and said, he asked me how to get to Buck Village. Although he didn't know the woman in front of him, she was obviously following the boy, and for the patient, he didn't want to cause any trouble to the kind boy, so he lied. Unfortunately, the other party directly exposed his lie. You don't have to hide it for him. A hoarse female voice said, his target is not Buck Village. What are you talking about? I don't understand. The patient shook his head in denial. The other party did not respond, but squatted down and stretched out a slender white hand holding a thin-necked purple glass bottle from the cloak, slowly shaking it in front of the patient's festering cheek, accompanied by a slight sound of liquid shaking, and a faint strange fragrance emanated. I said, what did he say to you? The hoarse voice was the same as before, but it seemed to knock on the heart when it entered the ears, making the patient's face dazed for a moment, and in a trance. Some words were unconsciously muttered. He said, I'll give it to you. Eat an orange before you die. Then we'll each have half. Eat it. If you don't, you'll never get it again. Good luck. I won't make up for the update today. I'll update 3 chapters tomorrow. If nothing unexpected happens in addition, the update time of this book is roughly before 11:30 noon. Because it needs to be reviewed after it is published, it is not posted all at once, but at intervals of 10 or 20 minutes, so basically you can read it around 12 o'clock. If there is a supplementary update, the author will state an approximate time in the statement. If something delays the update, I will also send a single chapter notification. Chapter 165 Hiding and Being Surrounded. Good luck. After the patient's dull words, there was a panic. Renly, who was touching his left wrist while walking, frowned. Originally, his idea was to test the effect of the ancient road seeds in different people's bodies, and whether it had special effects on dying people. He didn't expect that he would find a guy following him after such an experiment, and there are some special means. Renly continued to walk, without turning his head to look, but the direction of his progress had changed unconsciously. After passing a group of old fishermen who were processing their catch on the street, he took advantage of the cover of these people and ran quickly to an alley on the side. He used the dagger he carried with him, which he got on the road, to poke the wall as a step, jumped over the alley, and came to another narrow path. After a series of clever and decisive actions, Renly did not leave completely, but lay on the wall, his eyes fixed on the road outside the alley. An old fisherman with grey hair and a straight body passed by, an old woman with a hunched body passed by, and another fisherman with hurried footsteps passed by. At this time, the residents of Pebbletown were all children except the elderly. Regardless of the children, the elderly were basically old or disabled. Those who were slightly younger were not seen at all, because they had been recruited by the local lord to fight. This also made Renly's observation very clear. Although he couldn't really see it, he could understand from the patient's thoughts that the one following him was a woman wearing a cloak and with sharp eyes. This kind of person seems to be eye-catching even in a normal environment, let alone the current Pebbletown. Unfortunately, he observed for a long time and didn't see anyone with such characteristics passing by that street, which made Renly quite puzzled. That person seemed to understand that he wanted to go to the castle of the Lord here, not anywhere else. But the street in front is basically the most convenient route to there. Normally speaking, even if she wanted to be more concealed when following, she couldn't let go of this street and run to other places, right? The roads in this broken town are complicated and complicated. If you walk around a few more times, you might get lost. Seeing that there was really no special person passing by, Renly couldn't help but touch his wrist to feel it. He also didn't learn from the patient that the man appeared again, so he simply didn't waste this time, turned around and jumped off the wall, and walked towards the outside of this path. He didn't see the man, but Renly thought that he had escaped from the other party's sight, and it would be difficult for the man to find him again. But unless he gave up the idea of going to the Lord's castle here, otherwise I'm afraid. There were a lot of thoughts in his mind. On the surface, Renly didn't know which side of the town he turned to. He didn't ask passers-by, but just let himself walk casually in the streets or alleys. Finally, he looked up and found that he had unknowingly left the main part of the town and came to the edge. This made him stand there and think for a while, and then suddenly decided to give up this opportunity and not take the boat. But who is following him? King Balon of the Iron Islands is no longer searching for him, and besides that person, who else could be interested in him? Some drowned people who knew of his existence? But there were no women among the drowned people. Thinking of this, he looked up at the sky and found that it was already late, so he climbed over the wall and rushed into a nearby uninhabited house. At present, a large number of people in the Iron Islands have gone to war, and there are countless vacant houses. Renly didn't even know where he was at this time, so he didn't think that others would find him. The mud-made house was simple, with a thatched roof and a fenced yard. In the yard were several abandoned fishing nets and dried fish. The wooden door was locked, and even a diligent spider had woven a web in the corner of the door, but there was a window nailed with a wooden board on the side of the house. After struggling to pry open the board with a dagger, Renly climbed in through the narrow window. What he saw was similar to the house in the fishing village where he lived before, just as simple, and there was no food. But he ran in, just to find a safe haven. He was going to leave this place early tomorrow morning, so he didn't care much. There were some trivial noises from the window behind him, and then his calf was scratched by a soft object. It was the black cat proving its existence, but Renly didn't pay much attention to it. He casually threw a piece of dried fish meat he had just found in the yard at his feet, then walked to the simple bed in the corner of the house and sat on it. Then he continued to touch his wrist. There were 3 seeds spread out at this time. One was the original source Balon Greyjoy, one was the octopus in the sea, and the last one was the previous patient. Balon Greyjoy was now living in the castle on Pike Island, constantly using ravens to communicate with the islands about the war. The octopus had nothing to care about all day, except wandering around. Renly paid special attention to the last patient at this time, and he found that the patient's mind was not affected by the ancient road, or in other words, he was only affected by some unwilling to die fighting spirit, rather than other thoughts of burning, killing, and plundering. Think about it, this is normal. A person who is about to die, who can't even guarantee his own life, how can he have time to think about those useless things? It's just that perhaps this fighting spirit is also one of the components of the ancient road. Perhaps this fighting spirit itself has restored the patient's body functions. As he observed, Renly found that the other party's mind was becoming more active at this time, and he was not as decadent and desperate as at the beginning. At the same time, it might be the patient's illusion, or it might be true. The patient seemed to think that his weak body was slowly recovering some vitality. Renly couldn't be sure whether this was the feedback from the ancient road and was improved, because except for the original ancient road at the beginning, he didn't find that other ancient road seeds had spirituality to speak of. However, it is certain that this thing can make the dying person rejuvenate some spiritual vitality. After the experiment confirmed this, he stopped thinking about it, closed his eyes, and observed the surroundings with his sensitive hearing, and gradually entered a state of half sleep and half wakefulness. This is a new habit he has developed during this period of time. The breeze hit the wall, the waves were faintly audible, the insects chirped, the dogs barked, the chickens crowed, the rats squeaked, until the night passed quickly, and a new sound disturbed the quiet and deserted everything, and also woke Renly up instantly. He heard the footsteps of a group of people, and they seemed to have a clear goal, which was the house he was in. The original owner of the house has returned? This thought flashed through his mind, and Renly frowned, then quickly got up, and climbed out through the narrow window, ready to slip away, as soon as possible. But he didn't expect that he would be discovered as soon as he climbed out of the window, and then he heard a shout that seemed very excited. Son of the drowned god. He's here. Yes, it's him. I see him again. The voice sounded a little familiar, and this was Renly's first thought. He turned his head and saw a group of drowned men running towards him, and the tall shouter who sounded familiar to him, Aeron Greyjoy, the Iron Leader who kidnapped him and Mika. Thank you to my friend Mu Yunan for the 5,000 yuan reward. Thank you to my friend San Kian Mengi for the 3,000 yuan reward. Thank you to my friend Heath Ice-T, my friend Suzuan Zovo, and my friend This Tan Is Not This Love for the 1,000 yuan reward. Thank you to my friend 5,555,556 for the 500 yuan reward. Thank you to my friend Wu Xin Zhengfeng and my friend I'm Zhao Pang's dad for the 100 yuan reward. Chapter 166 The so-called Son of God. Although far away from the battlefield, the islands were still not peaceful during the war, or rather, there was an undercurrent beneath the apparent peace. Balon Greyjoy, the king of the Iron Islands, called on the younger generation of the islands to go to the battlefield to participate in the war, but the many old people left behind seemed more nervous than the participants. The Ironmen were fierce and cruel, but they valued their offspring very much, and now that most of their offspring were not around, they naturally could not relax. In this tense atmosphere, only the power of faith could make them a little calmer. In fact, the drowned people of the entire archipelago have been walking around the islands to comfort and preach recently, and they seem to be very busy. The belief of the drowned god has been deeply rooted in the Iron Islands for thousands of years, but not all islanders believe in it devoutly. Some are pious on the surface, some are not pious on the surface, and some are pious in their hearts, but not in their behavior. In addition to these, after countless years of infiltration, the Church of the Seven Gods in Westeros has also bred some believers on the island. The former Iron King, Balon Greyjoy, was quite indulgent towards those people, and the drowned people could not do anything about it. But at the beginning of the new king's reign, they had to take this opportunity to try to drive that group of people away and let those misled compatriots convert to the right path. Those who did not convert would be beaten with sticks until they converted. In short, everything needs to be corrected and taught by the drowned people themselves. But recently, a special news distracted the busy drowned people. That is, in the Great White Island, a group of people led by the drowned man priest, Sultan Soren, found the so-called son of the drowned god. Sultan Soren is a famous drowned man priest in the Iron Islands. He once claimed that the Ironborn originated from the drowned god's flowing palace and was created by the drowned god in his own image. He also claimed that the Ironborn came from the depths of the ocean and were born with the right to rule all waters. This statement was questioned by many people, but also sought after by many people. However, for the drowned man class, Sultan Soren is most famous not for his words, but for being the first person to choose to stand on their side after those guys who claimed to be followers of the son of the drowned god suddenly arrived. Yes, stand on their side. No one has ever seen the followers of the son of the drowned god, but they suddenly appeared, and they suddenly emerged from the water in a large-scale fishing operation. As a result, they were enthusiastically sought after by the people as soon as they appeared, and the so-called statement that they were sent by the drowned god was also believed by many people. It's just that the people are seeking their mystery, but the original drowned people in the islands are quite repulsive to this, and many even think they are a group of liars. Under such circumstances, the local drowned people originally planned to unite and expel those people from the Iron Islands, but they did not expect that a traitor would appear among them and disrupt the plan, and that traitor was Soren the Sultan. Later, the situation was out of control. Relying on the magical origin, the help of the traitor, and the words that were too radical but popular compared to the contemporary drowned people, the followers quickly gained a foothold in the islands. Their influence became more and more obvious, and they severely squeezed the living space of the local drowned people. Moreover, unlike the local drowned people who were scattered like a pile of loose sand, those followers were unusually united one by one, and often acted in groups. When their companions were bullied, they all swarmed in, making it difficult for the local drowned people to resist. If things continued like this, the two sides of the drowned people would one day have a bigger conflict, but it was precisely under this circumstance that the war broke out. The sudden war shifted the existing contradictions. Both the new and old drowned people and the entire drowned class began to preach and appease the people. In the process, there were signs of easing relations. However, this easing was completely wiped out after the news of the so-called son of the drowned god spread. The local drowned people generally believed that the new drowned people's claim that they came from more than 200 years ago was completely a lie, and the so-called son of the drowned god was just a cover for their propaganda and preaching. However, now it seems that those people actually want to turn this cover into reality. Obviously, the local drowned people cannot support those people to do so, because the drowned priests have always claimed that they are servants of God. If there is such a thing as the Son of God, wouldn't they have an extra Son of God king to rule the drowned people? Or like the false god sect in the Greenland, do those people want to create a bishop? This is absolutely intolerable. Countless local drowned people were indignant about this, and many drowned people were ready to call on all drowned people to go to Old Wyke Island to hold a prophetic meeting and then eliminate the conspiracy of the enemy, and by the way, drive this group of people away completely. God's servants should be pious, equal, and wholeheartedly believe in the drowned God, and should not become the tools of ambition of some conspirators. Cod, black cod, sardines, skates, ice fish, crabs, and even lobsters. As far as the eye can see, the food on the long table in front of him is all fish, and the cooking methods are also very monotonous. Fish stew, fish soup, fish stew. The only special thing is the black bread placed on a plate carved from driftwood. It has clear edges and corners and pure colors. You don't need to touch it, it just looks very solid. With one hand on his face and the other hand tapping the long table in front of him boredly, Renly felt a little toothache when he looked at all this. How could he, the Duke of Dragonstone and a member of the Baratheon royal family, become a so-called faith leader in the enemy camp? He raised his eyelids and glanced at the 3 drowned priests in the sealskin tent. 2 of them looked very young, and 1 looked very old. Their different looks made them have different temperaments. The same thing was that they were all standing in front of the long table, with expressions that were either respectful or hypocritical. If the Son of God feels that these foods are not to your taste, then I will send someone to notify the nearby Merlin family and ask them to bring some other foods you like. Seeing that Renly had not started eating for a long time, the old drowned man with long grey hair and wearing red, green, and blue coarse cloth said so. Under normal circumstances, the Son of God should not need to eat, right? The young voice was full of doubts, and also seemed to be full of self-denial, but neither the old drowned man nor the 2 young drowned men cared about it. When King Rhodes was alive, he also needed to eat, drink, defecate and urinate. A young drowned man behind him said, and that does not affect his holiness. But go to your holiness. Renly rolled his eyes when he heard this. He really wanted to know if these people would feel sacred when they saw the excrement inside, when they emptied their chamber pots. But it was obvious that this was a group of crazy guys. It might be that coming to this strange world made them extremely sure of the existence of gods, or it might be that their minds were a little abnormal due to the stimulation, or it might be that they wanted to regain their past ambitions. Except for this old drowned man named Soren, Renly had confirmed that the other drowned men were those who came more than 200 years ago. In short, when they were surrounded by them at the beginning, Renly had already confessed that he was not the son of the drowned god, but they just didn't believe it. Instead, they respectfully but rigorously brought him to this beach camp by the sea, and served him with good food and drink, of course. Before that, they actually used many methods to test the authenticity of Renly's identity. Then he was confirmed. There is nothing wrong with this, but there is Renly's acquaintance in this team of drowned people, and the other party knows his origin and name, so Renly has no intention of pretending to be a charlatan from the beginning. At the same time, although he has many special abilities, he also needs to eat, drink, defecate and urinate. So the question is, would a normal person think that a person who still needs to eat, drink, and even urinate, and sleep is a son of God? Unlike the previous names, this identity cannot be pretended. Therefore, when he found himself being surrounded, Renly said frankly that he did not understand what they were talking about, nor did he know what the son of the drowned god was. But he did not expect these people to not care about it. Even the old acquaintance Aaron now seems to have water in his brain and keeps saying son of God all day long. This seems to be in his favor, but Renly does not think that his true identity is not likely to be exposed, even if the Iron Islands are ignorant. If he really attracts the attention of a large number of people, his Baratheon family background will probably surface sooner or later. And he obviously did not forget that the people of the Iron Islands are currently fighting with Baratheon. When that time comes, it is hard to say whether the Son of God's divine status is more useful or his brain is more useful. Not surprisingly, Renly wants to slip away, but for now he has no chance. first, after the drowned men made a fuss, the local captains basically knew about his existence, and many of them even came to watch at the beginning. Second, these people knew his abilities, or knew that he showed his ability in the sea, so although they were respectful, they were very close to him in many aspects. The drowned men claimed that the Son of God did not correctly recognize his true identity at present, and obviously did not inherit the memory of the previous son of the drowned god, so it was normal for him to deny himself, and he should be able to adapt after a while. Renly could only laugh at this. The devout, the fanatics, the conspirators, the drifters, the half-believing and half-doubting. This is everything he observed in the past 2 days. Although many drowned people were truly respectful of his existence, Renly was not flattered to the point of losing his mind. He kept observing, and found that even among those followers from ancient times, not all of them were absolutely sure of his existence, or only a few were devout. And the reason for their behavior was actually very simple: ambition. The so-called son of the drowned god seemed very sacred to ordinary people, and some of his methods were also shocking, but in the hands of ambitious rulers, he was just a magical tool. The situation of the drowned king in history may have some special abilities and secrets, but in the end, he was just a tool to fool the people, and was elected by the drowned people in troubled times. And what is sacred about the identity of a tool? It's a pity that you are destined to be disappointed, Renly thought secretly. He couldn't figure out how these people found him. Logically, his behavior should be very covert, and he didn't hear any wind from the axe symbol. But it didn't matter. He couldn't possibly stay here and become the son of the drowned god. Regardless of his true identity, he had long been tired of the barren Iron Islands, and didn't want to stay there for long. But how to escape? Renly knocked on the table while pondering. It was actually very simple to escape alone. Even if this group of people watched him closely, they couldn't completely stop Renly from getting close to the sea. After all, the faith of the drowned people came from the sea. But if he escaped like that, he would face the old problem again. That is, he couldn't swim back to the mainland by himself. And after his identity was exposed, it seemed that it would not be easy to fool people into taking a boat like before. Renly was a little absent-minded for a while, secretly feeling that he was really making mistakes at every step. But the next person's visit temporarily interrupted his thoughts. Aeron Greyjoy, the youngest brother of Balon Greyjoy, the current king of the Iron Islands, and an old acquaintance who recognized him at first. The guy that Renly thought was crazy. There will be another chapter later. Chapter 167: The Silver-Haired Woman and the Liar. Aeron Greyjoy was a tall, strong young ironman with black hair and black eyes. He looked to be in his 20s. When Renly was kidnapped, his impression of him was that he was a drunkard. The second thing was that Aeron boasted when he was drunk, which he didn't know whether it was true or not. He once bet his longship with a group of goats, saying that he could put out the fire in the hall just by peeing. As a result, he ate goats for a year. In short, Renly thought that this young ironman who had kidnapped him was not a serious person. But when he saw him again in this sealskin tent, it was difficult for Renly to have the previous unsolid impression of him. The slightly drooped shoulders quietly became straight, and the slightly hunched spine became much straighter. The carefree smile on his face was no longer seen at all, and his expression was full of respect and piety. Unlike the seemingly respectful drowned men before, this Aeron seemed to be really convinced of him. After several contacts, Renly even felt that he was a little afraid of him. The sea washed away my ignorance and stupidity, Lord Son of God, he said respectfully. Now I'm ready to believe in the great drowned god, your father, so I ask you to personally perform the drowning ceremony for me. Sitting in front of the long table filled with fish food, Renly looked at the young iron man standing obediently across the long table with a strange look in his eyes, feeling that it was really absurd. You should know who I'm best, he replied. Do you really believe what those drowned men said? At this time, there was no one else in the tent except Aeron. The 3 drowned men had left temporarily, so he had no worries about saying this. The other party was stunned when he heard this, and then lowered his head even lower. In the past, I was still young, and was blinded by the superficial vanity. Lord Son of God, I ask for your forgiveness. As a small I didn't say I blame you. Renly interrupted him. I just asked you, do you really believe it? I believe it. Eren nodded without hesitation. Why? Renly asked curiously. Don't you think I'm Willis? This question always made him feel puzzled and alert. Even if he was scared, it would be impossible for a normal person to have no doubts about it, right? In the summer sea, you are Willis. Hearing this, Eren carefully glanced at the beautiful boy at the end of the long table with shoulder-length black hair and a slightly loose small-sized drowned robe. In the Greenland, you are Tully. On the way back to the Iron Islands, you are Will. On the way to Great White, you are Goober. And in Thumb Village, you are Little Rob. Renly's face was a little embarrassed when he heard this, but the other party did not finish his words, but said the last sentence with sincerity. But I can understand that these are just necessary identity disguises when walking in the mortal world. Your true identity is the son of the drowned god. It is absolutely true, and I have seen it with my own eyes, so I believe it. It seems that he was really scared. Renly thought secretly, or maybe his brain really got into water and became a little demented. How did you find me? He then asked another question. I mean, when I was in Pebble Town, a woman told us. The other party answered without hesitation. She knew you were in Thumb Village, and she also knew you were in Pebble Town. She even knew where you lived, so we were able to find you smoothly. What kind of woman? Renly asked with a frown. A silver-haired woman. Eren replied. She was wearing a cloak and had a good figure, but we couldn't see her face clearly. The only thing we can be sure of is that her hair is silver. What else? Nothing else. The woman usually only appears at night and then leaves directly after telling you the news. She never said anything extra. You trust her so much. Aren't you curious about who she is? We don't trust her. Salt Tongue wanted to catch her and interrogate her, but she was very powerful. We couldn't catch her with more than 20 people at the time. The young Ironman spoke with a somewhat awkward tone. Then Salt Tongue said that maybe what she said was true, so we went to Thumb Village to find you, but we didn't expect. You know everything that happened afterwards. Renly nodded absent-mindedly. A silver-haired woman, the one who was following him? He was quite alert when he found out he was being followed before, but he had no time to think about it after he was found by the drowned men. Now it seems that there is a connection. How did she find him? Who is she? Renly frowned even tighter. He couldn't figure out how he had provoked a so-called silver-haired woman. Or rather, in his impression, he didn't know more than a handful of silver-haired women. Duchess Ellery of Highgarden had silver hair, but she couldn't have appeared in the Iron Islands. What about the others? Considering that the mark on the wrist opened up the historical world, Rhaenyra's in the copy counted as one, but she was dead. And her sister could barely count as one, but she was an old woman, not a beautiful and slim silver-haired woman. Rejuvenation? This is possible. After all, her son has changed his sex. It is not difficult to understand that he has rejuvenated. There are indeed rumors that the queen practices black magic. But even so, even if she rejuvenates and comes to this world, she can't target me. On the surface, I have no connection with the copy. Thinking of this, Renly's mind moved, and he remembered the last silver-haired and blue-eyed woman, that is, the son of the queen. How is Tiana? He asked Eren. Renly felt very subtle about the female Mika, because it was the first time he saw such a gender-changed existence, and she was a tyrant king who was quite famous in local history. So although they belonged to the enemy camps 200 years ago, and 200 years later, Renly still didn't bear to let the other party drown in the sea without resistance, but gave her a dagger that could be used to survive. This is a rather contradictory psychology. On the one hand, he thought that if it was an enemy, it would be better to die directly. On the other hand, he felt that if the other party was really drowned, it seemed a bit regrettable. After all, there is only one of that kind of existence. She has been sent back to the Greenland. Eren replied. Greenland, Greenland, are all the general names given to Westeros by the people of the Iron Islands. Renly didn't know how this name came about. He guessed that it might be because there were more grasses and beautiful scenery over there. But now he was more curious about why that guy could get away so easily. Did you let her go so easily? At first, we were just very polite to her because of you, but we didn't decide to let her go. Eren replied, then I don't know how. She made a bet with my brother Victarion to duel, and whoever lost would agree to a condition, and then she won. So your brother let her go? Yes. Aaron said. Victorian is a man who keeps his promises. He never breaks a bet, so he sent a small boat to send her back to the Greenland. Renly was depressed when he heard this. There must be something fishy going on, but it's not important. At this moment, he only knew that the person who wanted to come to the Iron Islands didn't come, and the person who didn't want to come was trapped here. No matter how you look at it, this seems to be a lose-lose result. Immersed in this emotion, he didn't speak again for the time being. He didn't speak, but Aaron asked carefully, Lord Son of God, about the drowned ceremony. I'll think about it. Renly replied casually, I'll give you an answer when we get to Old Wyke. The drowned people plan to send him to Old Wyke early tomorrow morning, because it was the most sacred place in the Iron Islands, and it was the most suitable place for him, the Son of God, to truly appear. At the same time, Renly also vaguely understood that the group of drowned men gathered around him did not represent all the drowned men, so those people seemed to want to stage a godson to shock the hero's drama on Old Wyke Island, and that kind of situation. Renly was thinking to himself, and Aaron, who received a vague response, was a little uneasy, but seeing that the boy had no intention of paying attention to him, he still tactfully said goodbye and left. He opened the curtain door of the sealskin tent, and the gloomy sky and the grey sea outside immediately came into his eyes. Aaron took a deep breath of the air full of ocean flavor and shivered involuntarily. Then he nodded to the several robed drowned men guarding on both sides of the door. Did the godson promise you? One of them asked softly. The godson needs to consider it. Aaron replied. We welcome you very much, Aaron. The tall and thin drowned man who asked the question said so. Aaron thanked him, then turned and left, thinking as he walked. What was his name? Ryan? Aaron couldn't remember it, but it was no big deal. After all, there were at least 70 or 80 drowned people gathered here. It would be strange if he could remember them all. And that guy seemed to have just joined. Thinking of this, Aaron suddenly frowned and looked down at the boy and girl who ran in front of him. The boy looked about 5 or 6 years old, with a runny nose, wearing ordinary coarse cloth clothes, and had a pretty face. The girl was a little taller than the boy, but her face was full of freckles. She was neither pretty nor cute, but she was very active. Uncle Aaron, have you seen the Son of God? She ran over and grabbed the sleeve of the young Iron Man, jumping and asking. Speak with respect, Asher. Aaron said seriously, the Son of God is the Son of God, not this or that. But they all say that the Son of God is a liar. The boy wiped his nose and said, my brothers all say so. So is your father trustworthy, or are your foolish brothers more trustworthy, Theon? Aaron reminded his nephew. The reason why he is so devout in the son of the drowned god is not only because of what he saw with his own eyes, but also because his wise and powerful brother is also convinced of this. If he were not busy with official duties, his brother would even consider coming to meet him in person. Aaron thinks he is a rough man, but his brother Balon is a smart man. Now that both rough men and smart people think that the boy is the son of God, then what is he, if not the son of God? Of course, my father is more trustworthy, the boy replied. The girl rolled her eyes and asked another question. Uncle Aaron, I heard that the son of God is about the same age as us. What does he look like? Do you have to ask me to repeat it again, Asher? Aaron Greyjoy did not answer the question, but said with a little displeasure, the Son of God is not this or that, the Son of God is over there. The young Ironborn, who Renly thought might have water in his brain, was educating his 2 nephews and nieces, while Renly encountered a trouble that he thought was more interesting. You are not the son of the drowned god. The first sentence of an elderly visitor dressed as a drowned man successfully attracted Renly's attention. You are just a liar. There are still 18 chapters to go. Chapter 168. A fool. Staring at the boy sitting on the chair in front of him, Tal, the 3-drowned man, sneered secretly. His appearance was indeed very intimidating. Looking closely, his hair was obviously more bizarre than the black of the ordinary Ironborn, and his eyes were also very rare. Wearing the small grey-green-blue 3-colored drowned man robe, he really looked like a sacred aura that was not ordinary. But so what? Isn't he just a little thing that was chosen to deceive people? Tal believed that the drowned god existed, so he was pus, but because of his belief, he never thought that the drowned god would have any so-called son. What do they think gods are? Are they just vulgar humans like those ignorant people? It's ridiculous. The drowned god is the sea, the drowned god is a flying bird, the drowned god is a ship, and even the passing sea breeze. The drowned god is an existence that is not understood by humans, so he is a god. Anyone who attempts to vulgarize the drowned god is just an ignorant and stupid person. Even the name of the son of the drowned god is full of blasphemy. So he, Tal, who is respected by people as the three drowned man, is very angry now. At the same time, Tala did not believe that the son of the drowned god in history was so sacred. He believed that the so-called son of the drowned god was just a puppet promoted by many ambitious and impious people of that era, just like they promoted this child now, wanting to repeat the old tricks, or to imitate the ancients. Yes, he, the three drowned man, Tala, had long seen the true purpose of those so-called followers. Even when those people claimed to be followers of the son of the drowned god from 200 years ago, he guessed that those guys would play such a trick. But he originally thought that they would find an adult to carry out their plan. Is it because children are easy to control? But how much disguise can children have? The three drowned man was a little puzzled about this, just as he couldn't figure out how that group of people appeared and who they were. But it was obvious that no matter who they were a group of liars, a group of ambitious liars, and because of such a trick, they were quite popular. This made Tal, a drowned man of the three, who was originally one of the leaders of the drowned men of the Iron Islands and even personally put the driftwood crown on Balon Greyjoy's head, very dissatisfied. He believed that those people were disrespectful to God, and were a group of shameless people who used faith to make profits. He also believed that the existence of those people was not at all beneficial to the Iron Islands, but very dangerous. He also believed that the so-called son of the drowned god plan must be terminated. So he came here, found the child, and prepared to expose the lie himself. For this reason, he had to trim his beard and hair to avoid being discovered. At the same time, he had to use his previous relationships to disguise himself and get in here, in front of the so-called son of God. Tal, a drowned man, expected the child to show panic after his questioning. He expected the other party to be speechless, or even scared to cry, and he expected more. It seems that you are not in the same group with those drowned men outside? The boy's words interrupted the thoughts of the three drowned men. He looked at the expression of the so-called son of God intently, and found that this little thing was actually laughing. What's going on? Didn't he make his words clear just now? Thinking of this, the three drowned tailor repeated, "You are not the son of the drowned god." Yes, I have told them dozens of times, but no one believes me. This made the three drowned frown. What's going on? Don't they have any prior collusion before fooling people? So careless? Did they really just grab a child and dare to let him pretend to be the son of the drowned god? Do they think that the Ironborn will believe whatever they say? This is simply absurd and ridiculous. This discovery made the three drowned tailor's original anger dissipate. He suddenly realized that he seemed a little reckless. He should not have rushed over angrily after hearing the news, but should have inquired carefully. However, in fact, there was not much news circulating outside. People knew nothing about the Son of God, except the existence of the Son of God. Since you don't admit that you are the son of the drowned god, why do you still stay here? I said I'm not, but they all said I am. They said I didn't know who I was, but they knew, so they wouldn't let me go. The boy's voice sounded innocent, but then full of curiosity. So, you are not in the same group with them? The three drowned people, Tal, didn't know what to say. His previous thoughts were completely disrupted. He had never thought that this situation would happen. So he had to follow the boy's answer. They are a group of people who don't respect God, and I'm a worshipper. Then help me escape. I don't want to stay here as a puppet. Tal was even more surprised when he heard this. Do you know you are a puppet? Isn't it obvious? I deliberately peed in front of them and no one suspected anything. Whose son of God would pee? Tal's expression choked when he heard this, and then faced the boy's expectant eyes, inexplicably embarrassed. I can't help you escape. They're all around here. Then why did you come here? The boy asked in surprise. I want to expose your true identity. Now that you've exposed it, what next? Yes, what next? Sanayanran was a little confused when he heard this. His original plan was to expose the true identity of this child, expecting to scold this little thing until he cried for his parents, and then grab him and walk him to the group of liars outside to scold him. In this way, the news that he, Sananran, scared the false son of God and scolded the group of liars would definitely spread. Even if the group of people outside were not ashamed, the Iron races would never believe their words again. The original plan was good, but he didn't expect this person to admit it so readily, and he was not panicked at all. How should the next thing unfold? And this little thing? Can a normal child behave like this? The Sand people suddenly realized this, and then they were even more upset that they had not investigated beforehand. He only heard that the so-called son of God found by the group of people outside seemed to have many magical characteristics, but at that time he disdained to listen to them as lies. The son of God does not know his essence, but his extraordinariness has been initially revealed. We must do our best to teach and assist him, and we must make all the Iron races aware of his existence, and this is also the purpose of my summoning you here. A sentence he heard when he sneaked into this place suddenly appeared in his mind, but then the old Yan people hurriedly shook his head to get rid of this sentence. After thinking about it, he rolled up his sleeves. I will beat you, and beat you to tears. Although it was a bit unexpected, Taylor was still prepared to do it according to his original idea. This was not a big deal. Words could not solve this problem, but there were still fists, right? As a result, before Taylor, who was ready to move, took action, the strange boy suddenly asked a question. Who are you? My real name is Taylor, and they all call me Sanan people, Taylor said without much hesitation. Next, he was going to make a formal appearance, but he didn't plan to keep pretending. But the boy's words immediately afterwards made him stop in his tracks. Well, Lord Taylor, I have a better suggestion. What suggestion? Come closer to my ear. The boy had a serious expression and a serious tone. After thinking about it, the Sanan people felt that it was no big deal. It would only take a little longer, so they did as he was told. But just when Taylor got close enough, the boy suddenly picked up the plate of black bread on the long table beside him, hit himself hard in the face with a bang, and then shouted outside regardless of his bleeding nose. Someone come here, he wants to kidnap me. Thank you to the book friend Chan for the 300 reward, and thank you to the book friend Zianatang 246, the book friend JIU on the 7th floor, and the book friend 170,308,150,957,968 for the 100 reward. Chapter 169. Plans always have unexpected consequences. The beach camp, which was originally quite peaceful, became a mess in an instant after that shout. Faced with this sudden kidnapping incident, the 70 or 80 drowned people gathered here all rushed up, each holding a driftwood stick, and surrounded the bald old drowned man who was holding the boy. Don't come any closer. If you come any closer, I will beat him up. In the gloomy evening light, facing a large group of hostile drowned people around the beach, the old drowned man shouted with a slight tremor. The boy who was trapped in his elbow had blood all over his forehead and face, and he coughed a few times as if to cooperate, making the people around him even more angry. Who are you? The old drowned man with long grey hair stepped out of the crowd and asked the 3 drowned people coldly, do you know what you are doing? Do you know that you have offended the great drowned god? The old kidnapper was a little panicked at this time, after breaking away from the original plan, but the boy he was holding shouted at this time. He said his name is Tal. After the words fell, the old kidnapper trembled all over, and the group of people who were watching him covetously were also in an uproar. Tal, the 3 drowned man, was very famous in the Iron Islands, even more so than the grey-haired, salt-tongued Soren, because he had been diligently walking around the islands all his life, and many of his followers became drowned men through his hands. Not long ago, he personally put the driftwood crown on the head of the new king of the Iron Islands, Balon Greyjoy. So both the ancient drowned men and the local drowned men here are very familiar with this man. However, the one they were familiar with had long grey hair and a beard, but this one was bald, like a fleshy egg with its shell peeled off, and looked absurd, no matter how you looked at it. Regardless of this, what was he doing at this moment? Taylor? The salt-tongued and grey-haired Sauron repeated the name, and then he scolded loudly, "What a tailor! As a servant of the great drowned god, how dare you threaten his son like this? Even attack him? You are so rebellious against the right path. How can you be pious? Damn son of the drowned god." Old Egg became anxious after hearing this, and regardless of the panic that had arisen from the sudden change, he turned around and started shouting back, "You are a blasphemer who should meet the storm god, and you still have the nerve to talk about piety to me? You smooth-talking Sauron, you are using a child to fool people, and you are not so angry. I know you don't believe it. Many of you don't believe it." The grey-haired salt-tongue snorted coldly, "That's why I will bring the son of the drowned god to Old Wyke Island, to the sacred Grey King's Hall to prove it to you. But I didn't expect that you would do such an unjust thing. Taylor, teller of the 3 drowned men, I respect you so much, I'm really blind. From now on, the stick in my hand will no longer be polite to you, and the great drowned god will definitely punish you." Following these words, dozens of drowned men around also glared and left, and some even angrily hit the ground with the driftwood sticks in their hands, bringing bursts of rumbling sounds. "Damn you, Sauron, you're just good at talking. Everyone knows you." The old drowned man was about to curse back angrily, but before he could finish, he suddenly felt a push on his waist. He looked down and saw that the boy he had coerced was secretly gesturing behind him. "What tricks is this damn kid playing again? Question mark?" The third drowned man, Tal, cursed inwardly. According to his normal plan, he shouldn't be so embarrassed, because even if he grabbed this kid and showed his name, these people wouldn't dare to do anything to him. Just because he had a high prestige and was confronting them openly, they didn't dare to do anything to him. However, this kidnapping completely disrupted the situation that should have been there. Facing the kid with blood on his face, those people wanted to drown themselves with their own hands, and there was no way to carry out the original plan. Tal was anxious, but then he reacted and looked sideways, and then he saw that some drowned man had quietly gone around behind him, as if preparing for a sneak attack. This made the old man even more anxious, and the kid he was holding screamed. So he reacted instantly and shouted, "Don't come over here. If you come over again, I'll make him look good." This made the young men who were approaching from behind stop immediately, but it also aroused greater anger from those in front. But the old man didn't have time to care about their emotions at this time. At this point, he couldn't let the kid go honestly. He couldn't say that the boy's injuries were all caused by himself. This cunning kid. Tal cursed in his heart, but it didn't affect his outward behavior. It seemed that this was his first time as a kidnapper. He seemed a little unfamiliar and a little panicked. However, under the cover of the night, the old man still successfully spoke a basic kidnapper's words continuously, and he didn't want to argue with Yanch. "Everyone, stay away from me. Don't come near. Stay back, farther away. Boat, that's right. Get out of the way. Get me a boat. Rope? Yes, 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 there must be a rope." With the hostages in hand, the drowned people who were afraid of the consequences had no choice but to prepare the boat and the oars, and then retreat a few hundred meters. After doing all this, the surrounding environment was already dim, and dark clouds floated in the sky, continuously blocking the already sparse moonlight, making the visibility on the sea level high and low, and it didn't look like a good time to set sail. However, due to the situation, the old drowned man couldn't care less. After roughly tying up Renly with the rope, he supported the oars and prepared to set sail. The kidnapped person also stayed at the stern of the boat quite honestly at this time, without any resistance, but looked quite relaxed, which made the 3 drowned people Taylor even more angry after seeing it. "Damn you, kid, I'll kill you when I get my hands free," he yelled. Renly glanced at him and didn't take it seriously. He was originally delighted to find a man from the enemy camp sneaking into the tent, thinking that he could use him to get rid of the drowned people. For example, the other party would be responsible for providing the boat, and he would be responsible for escaping. However, after several conversations, Renly felt that this man was just an old fool. It would be difficult to cooperate with him, and he might even be a hindrance. It would be better to use his identity to escape. So he was kidnapped. Renly planned to wait until the boat sailed farther and the old man was completely out of the sight of the drowned people, and then he would jump into the sea and escape. Although this still did not solve the fundamental problem, it was enough to divert the attention of the drowned people to the hostile camp where the 3 drowned people, Tal, were. The relationship between the 2 parties seemed to be not harmonious. Even if he explained that he had escaped, no one would believe him. In other words, judging from the attitude of the old drowned man, there might not be any explanation. This also made it easier for Renly to leave, as long as there was enough time to buffer. Thinking about it, Renly suddenly heard the old drowned man rowing a rowing man screaming in panic, which made him look stunned. Then he suddenly saw the bald old man standing there rowing suddenly tilted his body and then fell into the sea with a splash. Or, he was dragged into the sea after someone grabbed the oars. Because Renly saw a tall and thin young drowned man who was wet all over climbed up the boat from under the water and then turned his head to look at him. The boy's face rose. "Who are you?" "My name is Ryan, Lord Son of God." After shaking off the water stains on his body, the other party gathered the long black hair that was close to his cheeks and then smiled at Renly. "I came to save you. There will be another chapter later. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 170 Sacred Coast. The coastline under the blue sky looks vast and bright. The beach is covered with red and brown crabs, some crawling and some motionless. White birds are flying high in the sea. Occasionally, a few of them land on the rocks to preen their feathers. They are not afraid of ships coming. Not far from the beach is a barren hill area covered with weeds. At the top of the area, rows of pale and ancient huge skeletons stand quietly. They are the remains of the Naga, or what the Ironborn call the Hole of the Grey King. The Iron Islands are a place of constant disputes, but this area located in the northwest corner of Old Wyke Island has always remained peaceful. In ancient times, under the ribs of the Naga was the place where the kings of the Iron Islands were crowned and selected. Not long ago, when the Iron Islands rebelled against the Baratheon dynasty, the new generation of Iron Islands King Balon Greyjoy was also crowned with a driftwood crown here, and then called on all the Ironborn to start a war. Just as this beach is called the Holy Coast, this place is a very sacred place in the hearts of countless Ironborn, and now, Renly, the holy son of the drowned god, has arrived here. A small grey-green-blue robe looks quite loose and free on him, and holding a black driftwood stick also makes this beautiful black-haired boy look more solemn. After getting off the boat, he was followed by a group of drowned people, and other boats were docked one after another, unloading some food and items needed to build a camp. At this time, the climate has basically entered winter. Although there is no snow, the temperature at the seaside is still not warm. Walking on the soft beach, the breath you exhale is a little white. Kicking away a red-shelled crab that blocked the way, Renly looked at everything in front of him. Finally, he looked at the pale ribs on the top of the hill not far away, and felt that this place seemed to have not changed much in nearly 300 years. He sighed with emotion about this, but suddenly a soft greeting came from behind him. "Has the Son of God been here?" "No," Renly answered unhappily. "They say you are from Old Wyke Island?" the person behind him asked again. Renly glanced at the person asking the question, not wanting to pay attention to him. This man was called Ryan, with a very ordinary pointed face, and the common black hair of the Ironborn. He was wearing a rather loose robe of the drowned, and he was not short in height, so he looked very thin overall. He was the one who died to rescue Renly last night. Because of his meritorious service in protecting the Emperor, he was arranged by the leader of the drowned to protect Renly, the son of God. Renly hated this man, but he couldn't show it too obviously. After all, this man was his savior anyway, but he didn't want to answer questions about his origins. So he changed the subject and asked, "How long will we stay here?" "It will take until all the drowned men in the islands have gathered," the tall and thin Ryan replied. "Master Salt Tongue and Master Drum have announced your identity." Renly nodded and did not ask any more questions. He turned his eyes to the hills in the distance again. Salt Tongue and Drum were the two leaders of the drowned men around. Salt Tongue was the old drowned man with long grey hair who was confronting Tal, and had more than 50 local drowned men following him. Drum was a younger drowned man who came from more than 200 years ago, and was the leader of the group of more than 30 ancient drowned men. Renly thought that these two were completely ambitious people who wanted to rely on his identity as the son of God, to work together to unite the entire drowned man class in the islands. Renly did not know what they wanted to do next, but he could see clearly what they were doing at the moment. They were calling people to build a camp on the beach. The drowned men were all wearing grey, green, and blue coarse cloth robes, which looked quite thin in winter, but none of them seemed to feel cold. They were working hard, using some driftwood collected from the sea to build simple wooden houses and tents. This kind of thing obviously didn't require Renly to wait here. With nothing else to do, he decided to go to the place where the Naga remains were. He didn't forget that the bones actually had special functions, and he was also curious about whether the things had other effects. No one stopped him, but 7 or 8 drowned men followed him all the time, protecting him at all times. After the kidnapping, the drowned men immediately transported the boy to the old Wake Island and sent enough people to follow him and strictly examined everyone they met, which made Renly feel like he was tying himself up in knots. But at this time, his mentality had changed, or he was no longer too worried about escaping. Because he learned something this morning when he touched the wrist mark, and this thing directly solved the ship problem that had troubled Renly for a long time. However, this matter still needs to wait for a while, and in the meantime, he was thinking absent-mindedly, and a crisp voice suddenly came, interrupting his thoughts. "Are you the son of the drowned god?" This seemed to be the voice of a little girl. Looking up, Renly found that there were 2 children standing at the end of the beach, with brown-black hair and black eyes, a boy and a girl. The boy was shorter and the girl was taller, and now the 2 were looking at him curiously. They are quite brave. Renly thought to himself, nodded to the 2 children, and didn't intend to pay more attention to them, and was ready to continue walking, but the girl's next sentence made Renly couldn't help but look at her more. "You're so beautiful." "Thank you. You're also will you marry me?" "I want to marry you." These words shocked the many drowned men following behind Renly, and one old drowned man stepped forward to scold him severely. Renly was amused and felt that children were really interesting, so he waved his hand and walked away without caring. "How can this be called nonsense?" The girl behind him continued to shout, "Men can marry women, why can't women marry men? Come on, old man, are you going to hit me? Don't pull me, Theon, why are you so timid?" Theon. Renly thought that the boy before was not the poor eunuch. Calculating, it seems that the age is about the same. He didn't think much about it, because as he continued to move forward, the drowned men scattered around the entire coastline all bowed to him as he passed by, and some even knelt on the ground with fanatical faces, which made Renly uncomfortable for a while. However, during this period of time, he was familiar with this, or he could ignore it. He would nod, or wave his hand occasionally, but more often he would ignore it. No one paid much attention to it. When he was far away from the coastline, he could hardly see these people. The road in the area where the Naga Hill was located was not smooth. As he moved forward, the surface slowly rose upward, full of gravel and weeds, making it difficult to walk. However, the advantage of holding a stick in his hand was that he didn't have to worry too much about slipping and falling or being tripped. A group of drowned people guarded Renly and finally successfully arrived at the Naga remains on the hill. Standing on the hard rock surface, with the shadows cast by the rows of ribs above his head, he looked up at the pale and ancient huge bones under the sun, and Renly couldn't help but recall the scene when he appeared here last time. At that time was tight and there was no chance to pay close attention to this place, but now, his thoughts stopped abruptly, and the surrounding environment seemed to become hazy all of a sudden. Even the sunlight in the sky became hazy. His heartbeat suddenly intensified at this moment, and Renly couldn't help but cover his chest. Then he looked up and looked around blankly, feeling dizzy, and the blood flowing in his body was getting faster and faster. Faintly, he seemed to hear a vast roar from the depths of the sea. Chapter 171 Taking the Blame. The black-haired boy in a loose robe walked to the bottom of the ribs and suddenly began to look dazed. He stood there motionless without any reaction. At first, the drowned people following him felt that the Son of God might be observing the ribs at his hand, but as time went on, some people found something wrong. The first person to notice the abnormality was Ryan, who was following behind. He was also observing the empty space covered by the pale ribs, but he suddenly saw the boy in front of him shaking unnaturally from the corner of his eye. He frowned, and then seemed to think of something. His face suddenly changed, and he stepped in front of the boy. Crouching and looking, he found that the boy's eyes, which should have been bright and energetic, had dilated pupils at this time, and his eyes were out of focus and full of confusion. So the drowned man named Ryan picked up the boy without hesitation and rushed down. "What are you doing, Ryan?" The drowned people nearby were full of surprise, and someone even blocked his way with caution, but the next sentence made them give way directly. "The Son of God is sick." If Renly was awake at this time, he would probably complain that the Son of God could be sick. But at this time, he completely ignored everything around him. One after another, the roars that seemed to belong to the roars of ancient sea beasts occupied his entire mind. He couldn't hear clearly, but it seemed to imply something. What does it mean? He pondered this in his heart, but he never figured it out until he felt an external force coming. "How are you? Son of God. Son of God. Son of God." The faint voice seemed to come from the horizon, but it quickly approached and finally became close at hand. His face was constantly slapped, and it felt a little painful. His dazed and shaking vision quickly focused, and finally he successfully saw a face that he hated very much. This Ryan seemed to be very anxious. This thought flashed through his mind, but Renly ignored it. The surroundings were in chaos. He looked up and found that he was surrounded by the rough faces of the drowned people, and the sunlight was mostly blocked. Whether it was true or false, at least the expressions on these faces were full of worry. The old drowned man with long grey hair, Soren, was also in this camp at this time. When he saw Renly looking up, he asked hurriedly, "How do you feel, Lord Son of God? Are you feeling unwell?" "Nothing is wrong," Renly replied. The rapidly beating heart in his chest had basically returned to normal at this time, but he seemed to have noticed some other changes. So he said, "You guys go and do your work. I want to go to the Grey Seeking's Hall again." "No." The boy was interrupted before he finished speaking. He turned his head and saw that the tall and thin annoying drowned man was staring at him seriously with a tough look in his eyes, which made Renly a little puzzled. Others were also quite surprised. "How can you interrupt the decision of the Son of God?" The long-haired salt-tongued Soren frowned and stared at the young drowned man named Lane, feeling that his words were very excessive. "I mean, just now the Lord suddenly fell ill because he walked there." Seeing this, the tall and thin drowned man hurriedly added, "They all saw it." After his reminder, the drowned men who had followed Renly nodded hurriedly. It seemed so. It didn't take long for him to get sick. Yes, the Lord Son of God recovered after he left. These words made salt-tongued Soren understand, and then he frowned unconsciously. The place covered by the ribs on the Naga Hill is called the Hall of the Grey King by the drowned people. It is a hall built by the remains of the Grey King, the first king of the Iron Islands who killed the world's first sea dragon Naga. The Grey King relied on this achievement and was deeply loved by the drowned god. He ruled the Iron Man in the hall for 1,000 years. Finally, after his skin turned as grey as his hair, he put down his crown and stepped into the sea. The Maesters thought this was an absurd folklore, and not all the drowned people believed in the existence of the Grey King. But no matter what, the Sacred Coast could have such a status today, only because of the existence of the Grey King's Hall. It was the most sacred place in the archipelago. From ancient times to the present, countless kings of the Iron Islands were crowned there, and countless people came there to make pilgrimages and kneel down. However, now the son of the drowned god would actually. I heard the voice of the gods. The boy's words interrupted Salt-Tongue Soren's thoughts, and the people around him were also stunned. "I heard it, but I didn't hear it all," Renly said seriously, "so I have to go back." The actual reason was of course not this, but seeing that, if he didn't say anything, it seemed unlikely that he would want to go back, so he had to use this as an excuse. "What did your father say?" Salt-Tongue Soren squatted in front of him and asked. His face was excited, and it was unclear whether he was really excited or just cooperating with Renly's words. "I didn't hear clearly, so I want to go back." Renly repeated, "You can't stop me." This made some people look at each other in bewilderment. Some were half believing and half doubting. Some were excited, and some frowned. However, because it was related to the drowned god, they really didn't dare to stop him. Even the tall and thin drowned man, Ryan, hesitated several times, and finally said nothing. So Renly was surrounded and returned to the empty place covered by the ribs. It was noon, and the light from the sky was very bright. However, when Renly walked into this place again, his vision became hazy again, and the whole person was in a trance. The heartbeat in his chest was like a drum, and the blood flow in his body was gradually accelerated. Originally, he should feel uncomfortable or even painful, but Renly didn't feel anything bad at the moment. It was like an ancient roar from the deep sea that occupied his whole body and mind. The characteristics of the psychic heart took effect at this moment, so Renly could feel what was filled in the sound, dull and anxious. It kept repeating, and the meaning of the voice was exactly the same, as if a phonograph was playing the same music repeatedly, and it seemed to be unconsciously inviting someone to respond to it. Renly could not respond, and he didn't even know what this thing was, so he could only stay still. But maybe listening to this voice was good, or maybe he triggered something. The roaring voices gradually had some different vibrations, which made Renly, whose mind was originally dazed by the roaring, sober up a lot. At the same time, he felt a stream of coolness emerging and spreading in his forehead, just like being suddenly poured with cold water when he was sweating profusely in the dog days of summer, which was very refreshing. He gradually had an emotional feeling of not being able to speak, just like a mute who could not speak all the time was suddenly cured. But this feeling was very strange. Even if he had the ability to speak, he seemed to have no idea where to start. Renly was a little anxious because of this. This kind of anxiety was not the anxiety of understanding something urgent, but the anxiety of not being able to speak, or like sometimes he wanted to describe something, but couldn't find the right words for a while. He didn't speak in the end, because he was interrupted again. But it was not that Ryan who interrupted him at this time, but the salt-tongued Sauron who ran up hurriedly. "Lord Son of God, please help to pull the believer Aaron Greyjoy back. He can't go to the Palace of Flowing Waters now." "What does it mean?" Renly, who was carried out of the rib area, was already unhappy about this, and he was even more puzzled after hearing this. But then he understood what happened. This salt-tongued Sauron had performed a drowning ceremony for Aaron Greyjoy before, but he didn't save him. The person seemed to have drowned. "What's the use of you looking for me for this?" Renly was speechless after understanding this, but then he reacted. It turned out that this old guy was looking for him to take the blame. "Thank you to Miliki Angwudi for the 5,000 reward. Thank you to KH1G Mengdu for the 2,000 reward. Thank you to Heath Iced Tea and Peanut Sauce for the 1,000 reward. Thank you to Zyanatang 246. Studied to become a top student. Lucifer Lam and Linengzi for the 100 reward. Chapter 172 The Nature of Evolution. Aaron Greyjoy, the fifth son of the Greyjoy family, the youngest brother of Balon Greyjoy, the current king of the Iron Islands, and the captain of the Ironborn who once kidnapped Renly and Mika. He is a handsome young Ironborn, but even if he looks good, he still looks scary when his face is pale and his lips are blue. Looking at the young Ironborn in front of him who is only wearing a pair of sealskin shorts, Renly frowned. If I remember correctly, not long ago this guy asked me to hold a ceremony for him personally, but I perfunctorily passed it over. I didn't expect that this guy was so eager to join the drowned army that he was unfortunately drowned. Renly didn't have this person in his previous life, but he knew that the Euron in his memory was the second brother of this Aaron, and Theon was this person's nephew. Of course, all this is not important at the moment. The most important thing for him at this time is how to fool him. The murderer who drowned the man was standing beside him, staring at the boy expectantly and solemnly. There was also a group of drowned people surrounding him. Everyone stared at Renly, as if afraid of missing any of his movements. "Can you save Uncle Aaron?" The young voice was full of worry and expectation. It was the boy Theon who was mixed in the drowned people. After he finished speaking, someone among the drowned people responded. "It's not about saving Kit, it's about taking Aaron out of the water palace. The great drowned god needs a good sailor, so he called Aaron over. Then as the son of the drowned god, the Lord Son of God should be able to bring my uncle back, right? The boy asked suddenly and seemed relieved. No one answered his question. The drowned people were silent in the face of this. Renly, the person involved, just glanced at the boy and ignored him. However, the boy's words hit the point. As the son of the drowned god, it is not easy to take someone out of his own hall, right? At least many superstitious people think it seems easy, but only those with a cool head know the real situation. This is one of the reasons why Renly did not intend to pretend to be the son of the drowned god from the beginning. It sounds interesting to be a charlatan, but it is not so easy to pretend. You need someone to help you deceive people, or you have real skills. Renly thought of the predecessor of the son of the drowned god more than 200 years ago. If I remember correctly, he also drowned many people. Afterwards, he just made a few light remarks and no one cared. However, the situation of that person is different from Renly's at this time. He has already established the image of the Son of God, and has even been crowned as king. And himself. He did not think much, but knelt on the head of the drowned man, touching his left wrist with his right hand, and covering his forehead with his left hand. It was cold and stiff. In his memory, there is a being in this world who can resurrect the dead, but that is obviously not himself. For this situation, it seems that there is no other choice except to try the seed of the ancient road on his left wrist. Renly didn't know whether the seed of the ancient road would work on the dead, but he thought that just saying the drowned god wouldn't let him go, like the senior, was obviously the worst option. The middle option was to put on a charlatan attitude and announce the results after trying hard. Even if he was questioned, he could probably get away with it. As for the best option, watching the fire that no one else could see merge into the dead man's forehead, Renly pursed his lips. He knew that the fire could not merge into dead things, but now it had merged into them. So did it mean that the other person was not completely dead? However, his previous experiments were on flour and wood, not human corpses. The fact that there was no feedback from his wrist afterwards made Renly's heart sink. So he began to think about the consequences of this matter unconsciously in his mind. If possible, he would naturally want to deny his identity as the Son of God, but he would not say it at other times. Denying it now would be completely courting death. So even if he couldn't save a person, he had to put on a charlatan attitude. Even if he would be questioned, even if the Greyjoy family held him responsible afterwards, that would be a matter for the future. For the time being, Renly did not think that the people around him would turn against him directly because he did not save the person. Who among the priests who drowned people has not drowned someone before? But even so, he would have to find a chance to escape afterwards, because this identity had cracks and was not so solid. Maybe one day something like this would suddenly happen, and he would be asked to take the blame. Thinking of this, he could not help but get angry at the old man named Soren behind him. You don't have the ability to drown anyone you want. Drowning is just drowning, but you also drowned your king's brother. Drowning is drowning, and you want me to block the knife for you. He did not continue to think about it, because a faint feedback suddenly came from his wrist, which made Renly's eyes condense, and he focused on the dead person in front of him. The other party was still motionless, but it seemed that he was not completely dead. A trace of joy emerged in the boy's heart, and then he became a little worried. But what should he do? Artificial respiration? Start cardiopulmonary resuscitation? As a qualified modern man, he has no idea about these things, and he is probably not as familiar with them as the drowning people around him. Ask others to rescue quickly? The leader of the drowning people was not saved before, and asking them to rescue again. How to say it? Time passed slowly, and the boy had a blank expression on the surface, but secretly his mind was working fast. But after a certain moment, he suddenly had an idea, and then closed his eyes. The boy kneeling there stood straight, his left hand covering the head of the corpse. His black hair and loose robes were constantly swaying in the sea breeze, and his solemn face looked really like that. This made many people who knew about it wondering if this kid really had the ability to revive the dead. This seems unlikely, but this child has many characteristics that ordinary people don't have. If it's true, the situation that seems quiet, but is actually undercurrent, seems to be much quieter at this moment. People instinctively hold their breath and stare at the boy in the shallows, staring at him kneeling there motionless, staring at his robe being soaked by the sea water, staring at the small fish gradually gathering along the shallows from all directions, and finally gathering around the boy's legs into a circle. The tall and thin drowned man Ryan was in the group of drowned people, and his expression became a little complicated. Many drowned people around him also felt a chill in their hearts. Those who originally believed in the son of the drowned god were even more expectant. The two children in the crowd were startled by this, and then they were scolded by an old drowned man and shut their mouths tightly, but this silence did not last long. When the dead man who had been lying motionless on the shallows suddenly stood up, bent over and began to cough violently, and vomited a lot of seawater. When the man who should have been sentenced to death looked around with his painful and confused eyes, the crowd immediately became uproar. He's alive. He's really saved. The son of the drowned god. It's really the son of the drowned god. The great drowned god has appeared. A group of people rushed up at this time. Some of them helped to pat the back of the resurrected man to make it easier for him to spit out the seawater. Some of them helped Renly stand up and then personally wrung out the seawater from the hem of his robe, and some of them bent over and wiped the sand off his bare feet with their sleeves, and more people were cheering or happy or standing there in doubt and doubt. However, none of this affected Renly's thoughts. He was still immersed in a system message that had not appeared for a long time. Your psychic heart characteristic has successfully evolved into psychic language. Evolution. Psychic language. Renly, who was busy serving the drowned people, seemed a little absent-minded. After looking at the young ironman he rescued, he shifted his gaze and looked at the Naga hill in the distance. There is still one chapter later. Chapter 173. The initial change of pattern. Everything that happened on the beach was noticed by the drowned people, although not everyone could see it happen. After it happened, and the news spread, people still felt the same way, and were even more enthusiastic, because of their companions. So when Aaron Greyjoy was hugged and kissed by the drowned people, and put on the grey-green-blue robes that represented the drowned priests, he was surrounded by the drowned people who did not see it with their own eyes. They asked about his drowning ceremony and everything he saw after death. However, the new drowned man did not seem to remember much about his resurrection from the dead. He stumbled when he spoke, and his expression was blank, as if he had not recovered yet. Seawater, all seawater, inside, outside, left, right. I seem to have entered the drowned god's palace of water, and then what happened then? A young drowned man asked impatiently. Did you see the great drowned god? Drowned god? No, I didn't see him. I really wanted to see him. No, I seemed to hear the ancient road. Aaron stammered. That seemed to be the words of the drowned god's instructions. And then, as he spoke, his eyes unconsciously looked at the black-haired boy who was talking to Salt Tongue Soren at the end of the beach. Then I heard the voice of the Son of God. What did the Lord say? Another drowned man asked enthusiastically. Call you back? Or let you follow him? Neither. Aaron answered hesitantly. What I heard seemed to be, run. Your brother Euron is coming. Run. Your brother Euron. He covered his head in pain. Before he finished speaking, his expression was both confused and fearful, and there was a trace of hatred for the name Euron. The drowned people around were puzzled by this. Your brother is here? Euron? What does that mean? They wanted to ask, but at this moment, Aaron seemed to suddenly realize that he had said too much, so his face turned panicked, and then he stood up with a staggering step, pushed the people around him, and left in a hurry. He doesn't seem happy. A young drowned man on the spot was surprised by this. After all, he died once. Another drowned man nodded. No one would be happy, but he was saved. The young drowned man said incomprehensibly, "It is such an honor to be saved by the holy son of the drowned god. Maybe he would rather stay in the drowned god's flowing water palace?" Several young drowned people over there felt a little puzzled, and more drowned people here were staring at the two figures, one old and one young, not far ahead. The old man had long grey hair, outstanding temperament, sharp features, and a sense of majesty, but at this time, facing the black-haired boy opposite him, he seemed like a child who had made a mistake, and looked well behaved. Although the boy looked young and short, his expression and actions were full of arrogance. because they were a little far away. The drowned people watching could not hear what they were saying, but they could clearly see that the leader of the drowned people who led them was honest and did not dare to refute. This made some people sigh, but more people subconsciously took it for granted. Before they knew it, the atmosphere here had changed. Renly did not care what the drowned people in the distance thought of the current scene. At this time, he was staring at the old drowned man standing in front of him with a serious face and spoke rudely. If this happens again, I will not help you solve it. You have to know that resurrecting the dead is not as easy as you think. Resurrection, the dead, not so easy. These words made the old Yanran associate a lot, so facing the serious boy in front of him, he said without hesitation, I understand, Lord Son of God, if there are such things again in the future, we will not bother you to help. At the same time, there is no need, and you should not let anyone disturb me. Everything you are doing now is not important to me. Okay, Lord Son of God, I will strictly restrain my subordinates Yanran. Don't worry, they will not disturb you again. Salt Tongue Soren still answered without hesitation. I'm not interested in the learning requirements you mentioned before, such as dogmas and rituals, so forget it. No problem, you are the son of the drowned god, so you don't need to learn our useless things. The old drowned man said with a shameful expression, I didn't think it through. Lord Son of God, I will think carefully in the future. That stick doesn't fit your hand very well. I'll find you a new one right away. As for food, I understand. You like beef but not fish. I'll tell the drowned people to prepare it for you. This old guy is very good at judging the situation. Renly thought to himself that there was nothing more to say, so he turned around and was about to leave, but after a few steps he suddenly thought of something, paused, turned around and said, that Ryan. You don't like him. Salt Tongue Soren immediately said, I'll replace him with someone you are satisfied with. What do you think of Sander? Renly was moved when he heard this, but after thinking about it, he waved his hand. Forget it, let's just go with Ryan. He felt that there was something wrong with Ryan, but Renly couldn't tell what was wrong, so he was a little worried. But if that guy really had hostility towards him, he would have already taken action. As one of the closed drowned men, Ryan had no shortage of opportunities. So he was a friend, not an enemy, or was he just overthinking? Thinking about this while walking back, Renly soon found that the person in question had surrounded him again with 7 or 8 drowned men. So he looked up at the other person's face and didn't find anything wrong with him. So he stopped thinking about it and planned to observe more and stay alert when he had free time in the future. And for now, the most important thing. He looked up in the direction of the Naga Hill. The characteristics of the psychic heart evolved into the psychic language, and Renly thought that the psychic language was very magical because it could convey emotions through body language. That's right, it was emotions, not words. The main reason for resurrecting Eren before was that he was not completely dead, and the second was the spiritual encouragement of the seed of the ancient road. However, the encouragement of the seed of the ancient road alone was useless, because the host's main consciousness had fallen into a near-death coma, without consciousness, and could not cooperate at all. So after realizing this, Renly took the initiative to try the ability that he had not had time to speak out on the hill. In the end, he successfully transmitted a series of fearful emotions to the other party, and after waking him up, he also obtained the recognition of the system information. And he obviously would not ignore the source of all this. It was because there was a will on the hill that was eager to communicate with himself, or with anyone who could communicate. So, what exactly did it want to communicate? With this doubt, Renly walked towards the hill again, but he obviously couldn't imagine that he would be gone for 3 days. There are still 16 chapters to go. Chapter 174, Seeing the Spirit. Under the moonlit sky, the yellow beach on the edge of Old Wake Island was dotted with bright lights. Bonfires were burning quietly, like hundreds of lanterns lit up at the same time, scattered all over the sacred coast. 4 young drowned men were sitting around a bonfire at the end of the beach. One of them had brown hair and was nagging with his companions. Well, actually said that we are disrespectful to God. When the Son of God wakes up, I wonder if he dares to say that. What did you say to him? The companion asked curiously. When I told him about Iron's resurrection, He didn't believe it. The brown-haired drowned man said, he also said I was a liar, and that we were all liars who teamed up to deceive them. I told Dyke about it, but he didn't believe it either. Another companion snorted, we used to be good friends, but he didn't believe me. Instead, he believed what that three-drowned man Tal said. I told him that the old guy came to assassinate the son of God a while ago, but he still didn't believe it and thought I was slandering the old guy. They are just a bunch of short-sighted and ignorant people. The last one spoke silently. When Lord Son of God wakes up, they will know who is right and who is wrong. When will Lord Son of God wake up? The person who spoke first raised this crucial question. I don't know. Maybe wait until tomorrow morning? You guessed the same thing last night. The night before yesterday, too. These words made the four young drowned men look at each other, and finally all looked at the place where the Naga Hill was located. Unfortunately, they were not close to it at this time, and could only see a faint fire, which was the proof that Lord Salt Tongue Sauron had sent people to station on the top of the hill. Apart from that, they could not see anything else. I hope you don't have to say that tomorrow night. One person murmured. I hope so too. The man who spoke shrugged and glanced at another bonfire not far away. That way they can shut up. Tomorrow morning, we will go and talk to Sauron. A steady voice sounded from the sealskin tent in the other direction of the coast. This fast should end. The person who spoke was a middle-aged drowned man, sitting on the ground in the tent, with messy hair, but a very neat face. At this moment, he closed his eyes and faced a brazier in the tent and said lightly, the war has not stopped yet, our mission has not been completed, but we don't have time to waste here with Sauron. Yes, I still have a fishing village to visit on Lonely Light Island. A skinny old man next to him lowered his head and rubbed his black feet and said, I originally wanted to come and see what the Son of God looks like, but it's been 2 days and Sauron won't let me see it. You still expect me to support him? Sauron is a cunning old guy. The last person in the tent snorted and said, the little thing he found is more cunning than him, cruel and should be beaten to death. These words were obviously filled with anger, which made the skinny old man in the tent, who had heard many rumors, grin at him. Why, you, the three-drowned man, have suffered a lot in front of Sauron. Only the drowned god can make me suffer. The old drowned man with a bald head said without blushing or panting, Salt Tongue is not qualified. He said so, but in his heart he couldn't help but recall the night when he was dragged off the boat and almost drowned, and he couldn't help but get even more angry. That kid, I tell you, at such a young age, you can see that he is a disaster. After we finish talking to Sauron tomorrow, you have to support me in beating him to death. Beat him to death. The drowned god won't let us have the blood of the Iron Race on our hands. Then drown him to death. I heard that the Son of God is not afraid of water. The skinny old drowned man reminded. At most he can hold his breath. Taylor, or three-drowned man, said disapprovingly, my estimate is to drown him for a whole day, so I don't believe he will die. Maybe he really won't die. Didn't you hear those guys outside say that all the people who died 2 days ago were brought back to life by that Son of God? The skinny old drowned man said again, he is the younger brother of our good King Baron. I asked him, and he doesn't seem to be lying. That Yelan is just a lazy drunkard. Taylor, or three-drowned man, said disdainfully, his words are not credible. But I heard that our King Baron also believes in the Son of God, and he sent his children to recognize him. I saw the 2 little guys this morning, and they believed it very much. You believe what a child says? The three-drowned man retorted. The other party smiled when he heard this, and continued indifferently. I also heard that the Son of God saved a man with erythema disease when he passed by Pebbletown. That man can jump around now. Many fishermen over there know about this. If Sauron's group hadn't strictly prohibited outsiders from coming, they would have come here long ago. Erythema disease is not fatal, which doesn't mean anything. This made the skinny old drowned man blink. You refute everything I say. What? Belen is blind. Are you 3 drowned people blind too? Then are you, old grey gull, going to stand on their side? If that's the case, of course I will stand on their side. The skinny old drowned man rubbed his feet and said, I'm old, who doesn't have some problems? Especially for people like me who sleep on the reef all day. It's not easy when the wind blows. Don't hold out hope. The middle-aged drowned man with his eyes closed facing the brazier said calmly, "I've heard these news too, but Sauron hasn't let us see the Son of God for so long. I think it's all fake news. That's why I'm hanging out with you guys now." The skinny old man hugged one of his feet and said playfully, "I'm just waiting to expose that old guy's lies with everyone." Over there, the enemy camp was discussing the son of the drowned god, and over here in another tent, a grey-haired old man was sitting face to face with a young drowned man, and they were talking about the same thing. Old Grey Gull has been shaken. I think as soon as Lord Son of God wakes up, he will immediately stand on our side. The grey-haired old drowned man said in a light tone, "There are smart drowned men under the command of the third drowned man Taylor, but under the leadership of Taylor, they can't cause any trouble, so we don't need to care about them. The only one who needs attention is the blind man Baron Blacks. This man read books before he became blind, and he has a good brain. He has the largest number of drowned men under his command, so we need to pay special attention to him. They are just some ignorant people." The young drowned man opposite said disdainfully, and then asked, "When do you think Lord Son of God will wake up?" The young drowned man who asked the question was called Zuogu. He had a fair face and soft features. He sat there straight. He didn't look like a priest of a god, but rather like a scholar. "When it's time to wake up, you will wake up naturally," the old drowned man with long grey hair replied. "There is no way for us mortals to guess what's going on with the great drowned god." Great drowned god. The young drowned man chewed on this word and said hesitantly, "Do you really believe that the Son of God is talking to the drowned god?" "That's what the Son of God claimed that day," salt-tongued Sauron said. "It won't be false." "Really?" Zuogu didn't comment on what he said, but he didn't say anything to refute it at this time. After the dead man was resurrected that day, the man in front of him looked like he was following the Son of God's lead. No one could tell whether he was sincere or not, but it was the right choice. It was because the prestige of the son of the drowned god among the drowned man group was growing day by day. Unlike those drowned man who came later and had a questioning mentality, the drowned man who were originally here could more clearly understand whether some of the things done by the Son of God were true or not. Therefore, there was no need for anyone to preach or brainwash them. They naturally turned to the Son of God, including the drowned man under him. Zuogu thought to himself. As a person who came here more than 200 years ago, Zuogu firmly believed that the gods existed, but he had a similar view to the hostile three drowned man, Tal, and believed that the gods could not have any sons. So in fact, he, the leader of the followers of the son of the drowned god in the old days, had turned over a new leaf after coming to the new world and was ready to serve the great gods devoutly. It was just that he changed his mind because of this, but his subordinates were still obsessed with it, or in other words, their unfulfilled ambitions in ancient times had not been extinguished, so when the news of the son of the drowned god appeared in the world, they were completely restless one by one. Zuogu could not object to this, because he did not have such a great prestige to completely suppress the ambitions of his subordinates, and speaking out against it would only make him lose support, so he could only run around for this. Originally, he actually disagreed with this, but he did not want to welcome back the son of the drowned god, who really had some special powers, which could not only attract schools of fish, but also awaken drowned people. These powers are more bizarre than those of the King of Rhodes in the past. Zuogu was also surprised by this, but to say that this alone can determine that the child is the son of a god. He took a sip of the weak tea on the small table in front of him and shook his head unconsciously. In any case, this is a good thing for their goal. The more powerful the son of God is, the smoother the process of unifying the drowned people of the archipelago will be. So sometimes the truth is not so important. Just look at the cunning old guy named Sauron in front of him. He keeps calling the Son of God, but before the Son of God shows his power, didn't he want to control him? Later, seeing that the situation was not right, Sauron changed his treatment in time. However, seeing how decisive he is, it is obvious that he can't be pious. This hypocritical world, Zuogu thought secretly. If the great drowned god was really watching them, then the first to be punished would probably be these hypocritical drowned people who served him. Thinking of this, Zuogu picked up the tea bowl and prepared to take another sip of the light but mellow wheat tea. As a result, before the tea bowl reached his mouth, He suddenly saw the old man sitting at the small table in front of him, and the old man sitting opposite the small table suddenly shining brightly. No, not on them. Seeing the horrified expression on the face of the grey-haired old drowned man who was illuminated by the bright light, the young drowned man suddenly turned back and looked. Then, he saw light, a lot of light. It shone from outside the tent, ignoring any obstructions, and was a faint blue light. This light seemed to be the sun's rays hanging high in the sky, penetrating into the tight sealskin tent, turning into thousands of spots, covering the surrounding closed space, rippling in a trance, as if the underwater world had descended. However, it was not daytime outside at this time, and the sunlight was obviously not blue. The young man suddenly thought of something, and his heart tightened. He could not wait to get up and open the door of the tent to look outside. Then he saw a scene that he would never forget in his life. Light emerged from the top of the Naga Hill in the distance and radiated in all directions, permeating everything and dispelling the endless darkness, like a bright blue sun rising slowly. And at the core of this bright light, a small but tall figure was clearly visible. In a trance, Zuogu seemed to see a god. Thank you to the book friend who strives to become a top student for the 300 reward, and thank you to the book friend Xianatang 246, the book friend Linengzi and the book friend 201807071250374415. For the 100 reward. Chapter 175 Nagafire. The dazzling blue light was not limited to the drowned people of the Sacred Coast. Even the commoners and nobles of Old White Island could see it clearly or dimly after the light emerged. The obviously extraordinary phenomenon shocked many people, and they put on their clothes and rushed in that direction. Some ignorant people believed that there might be some treasure falling from the sky in that direction, but more people realized that the direction pointed to the Naga Hill where the Grey King's Hall was located. Recently, the matter of the son of the drowned god had already caused a lot of noise there. A large number of drowned people gathered there, and it was impossible not to attract attention. Did they really cause a miracle? In a castle tower, an old man muttered to himself as he looked at the situation that was flickering like stars falling from the sky. After observing for a while, he resolutely turned around and walked out of the tower, deciding to take people to see the details. As the head of the Zuogu family on the island, and also the leader recognized by other lords of Old White Island, the old man's team was huge, and on the way, people from several other major families gathered and headed towards the Sacred Coast. On the way, they talked about it, and various speculations were constantly put forward, but it was generally believed that it might be the drowned people and their sons of the drowned god who made the noise. However, the specific situation could only be known after they got there. The light was very bright, so the closer they got to the destination, the clearer the road under their feet became, and the faster they traveled. Unfortunately, before they reached the destination, the light went out quietly, and when the team finally passed through a pile of rocks and arrived at the Sacred Coast, they were directly stopped by the drowned people. This is Dunstan Zuogu, the head of the Zuogu family, the leader of the plunderers of Old White Island. One of his retainers came forward to negotiate, but the drowned people who stopped the team did not give him this face. As it involves the son of the drowned god, we cannot let you in, even if King Balan comes. One of the white-haired old drowned men said expressionlessly, "Please go back, my lords. The drowned men have a special status in the Iron Islands. Although they do not hold power and have no soldiers, from the leaders of each island to the common people, every iron race needs to be polite to them and cannot offend them at will, because they represent the drowned god behind them." What happened in there? A lord couldn't help but ask. "We will tell you what you should know after the event." The old drowned man declared so, and the other drowned men behind him still blocked the way motionlessly. So the many lords and nobles who hurried over looked at each other, and finally could only leave in disappointment. Their curiosity was not satisfied in the end, because there were only a few words of news that came out afterwards, and they were mostly nonsense. The son of the drowned god communicated with the great drowned god, and showed miracles on the top of Naga Hill. No one knew what the miracle was. Later, when they were able to get close to the Naga Hill, they only saw a bare hilltop. That's right, not only did they not see the miracle, but they also lost the ancient Naga remains. This situation made the nobles generally dissatisfied, but the drowned people kept silent about it and never revealed a word. However, whenever they talked about it, their expressions seemed fanatical. You are too presumptuous, Soren. Under the cover of sunlight, a skinny old drowned man pointed at the grey-haired old man opposite with dissatisfaction and cursed. It was you who asked us to come to Old White Island, to pay homage to Lord Son of God, and it was also you who didn't let us see Lord Son of God. We have been here for 5 days, and haven't even seen what Lord Son of God looks like. What are you doing? Excluding us? That's right. A bald old drowned man next to him complained. We all know your plan with that Zuogu. We have agreed now. Yes, we agree, but you have to let us see our Lord Son of God. Apart from anything else, I want to apologize to the Lord in person, but now you won't even let me apologize. Do you want to kill me? These words made the grey-haired old man glance at this guy. He felt that this old thing was really shameless. When he came before, he kept calling you a little brat, but now he is calling you an adult. However, thinking of the shocking scene that happened that night, such a change is only normal. What he thought in his mind did not affect his response. The grey-haired old man looked at the last person who was confronting him. Bellin, you are a smart man. You should understand that what I said is not false. It is indeed inconvenient for the Son of God to see people at the moment, and I'm not stopping you from seeing him. It is impossible for the Lord to be inconvenient all the time. The blind Bellin, who opened his eyes and revealed a pair of grey pupils, said lightly after hearing this, I'm different from them. I just want to ask when the Lord Son of God can see us, the servants who have served him devoutly. I need to ask. Salt Tongue Soren heard this. I will send someone to notify you when there is a result. You said so last time. The skinny old drowned man said dissatisfiedly, it was the same last time. That's right, I suspect you are lying to us. Taylor, a bald-headed three-drowned man, said angrily, in fact, I didn't ask. I really didn't ask. Salt Tongue Soren said expressionlessly, but it's not that I didn't want to ask, but I couldn't get close to the Lord. Are you kidding? The skinny old man nicknamed Old Grey Gull sneered. The people guarding the gate are all your people, but you told me you can't get close. That's right, they just treat us as fools. The three drowned people, Tal, echoed. They are indeed my people, Salt Tongue Soren said, with a trace of helplessness on his face. But they now listen to the orders of the Son of God more. After hearing this, the two people on the opposite side looked at each other in surprise. The tent made of high quality seal skin looks solid and thick. At least, all the noise outside is blocked at this time. There are always people running outside the door to enter the tent, but the drowned people guarding the door faithfully carry out the order given by their Lord Son of God before. That is, no one is allowed to disturb anyone. So whether it is the drowned leaders, ordinary drowned people, or even ordinary people who sneak into the camp, none of them can see the son of the drowned god who is becoming more and more magical on Old White Island and even the entire Iron Islands. People who could not see the shadow of the Son of God did not feel dissatisfied because of this. They generally believed that their sacred son of the drowned god might be busy with something important, such as communicating with his father. However, this was just people's own imagination. In fact, Renly, the so-called Son of God, was not doing anything serious at this time, but sleeping. That's right, sleeping. Or rather, he had just woken up and was sitting at the head of the bed rubbing his eyes. Being on the top of the Naga Hill for 3 days, constantly communicating with the inexplicable will, this process consumed Renly very much. Even after it was over, he fainted without even having time to check the changes brought about by it. It was not until he slept for a day and a night that he woke up again, but he felt very tired, weak all over, and couldn't help yawning. So he basically spent the past 2 days eating and sleeping, and eating. It was not until this time that he felt better mentally, but he still had a faint headache. However, this did not affect him from looking in the mirror. The resources in the Iron Islands were scarce, and the round mirror placed on the bedside was even transported all the way from Great White by the drowned people. However, it still did not look as clear as the ones he had in Highgarden or even Storm's End. But this did not affect Renly's observation of himself, or rather, the observation of the information emerging in the mirror. Racial level, LV3. Profession, Bard. Entry level, Knight. Entry level, professional features, sensitive to music, singing spirits, knowledge, heraldry LV7, swimming LV7, archery LV5, knowledge, poison making LV5, dagger mastery LV5, etiquette LV3, fishing LV2, LV1 skills ignored, derived features, psychic emblem, Valyrian bloodline, mutation, curse of embers, warrior sun, psychic language, naga fire. Psychic language, you can feel the emotions transmitted by living beings, and you can also transmit your own emotions through physical touch. Valyrian bloodline, mutation, the mutated Valyrian bloodline in your body has been strengthened again, and your physique has been enhanced. You have some mysterious qualities that come with your bloodline. When you are in the underwater world, you will not feel tired or hungry. You have the ability of illusion mimicry, and your existence is very attractive to aquatic species. Naga fire. Naga fire will greatly inhibit the aging of your body, and your lifespan has already transcended the mundane world. Racial level upgrades bring about all-round physical improvement, but because of his weakness at this time, Renly cannot perceive his current physical condition, but he can clearly see the changes in his body's characteristics. The Valyrian bloodline mutated again, and it even seemed to allow him to become a tireless perpetual motion machine when in the ocean. The psychic language is no different from the ability he had figured out before, but now he seems to be able to feel the emotions of living beings at will, instead of being able to do so only when the other party is eager to do so. As for the last Naga fire characteristic, Renly narrowed his eyes. The physical improvement was just a change that was incidentally accompanied by the communication. In fact, the most important gain from this change was not in himself, but an external object that would be bound to cause chaos and turmoil if it was exposed. Thinking of this, his eyes left the mirror in front of him and turned to look at his left wrist. The chaos mark occupies the center of the wrist. The seed of the ancient road symbol is in the lower left corner of the mark, and in the upper right corner of the mark, a blue snake head with clear lines and a vivid appearance is quietly flashing. Or maybe it is not a snake head, but the head of a sea dragon, the head of the sea dragon Naga. However, in fact, there is not much connection between this quietly emerging mark and Naga. Its appearance is like this, but if the internal situation is told, it is enough to shock anyone. The mark contains a god. The drowned god. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.